this as well, so that may be relevant during public comment. With that, I defer to the chair.
Okay, this is the planning board meeting, the March 4th, 2026. We'll start with roll call. Brian Balcom.
Here.
Jen Bluestein. Paul McCart.
Here.
Charlie Palmisano.
Here.
Jamie Pennington.
Here.
Rick Tainter. Here. Jack LeClaire.
I'm here.
He is online.
He's online.
Yeah, Jackie with us?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Matt Hemmer.
Here. Jack, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Matt, you hear us?
I guess we'll maybe proceed for now.
We'll continue to work it. Yeah. An item. We have 3 items on our public hearings agenda tonight. Caswell Development, Institute for Savings, and Newburyport Pentecostal Assembly Church. I'm going to suggest, although that was the order presented in the agenda, I'm going to suggest, just for efficiency of time, that we start with the Pentecostal Assembly Church. So if there's a representative here now, and you can come forward to make your presentation, I think we can address this first. Thank you very much.
Good evening.
You can state your name and address.
Absolutely, sir. On the record, my name is Miguel Wisno, civil engineer from Williams and Spiragus, located at 189 Main Street in the middle of Mass. Good evening, everyone. Thank you.
May need to speak up a little.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify for folks, those mics actually aren't being used. We're advised not to, so we're using just the audio. If you don't mind speaking up, we're trying to get it through the owl device here.
No, I'm generally accused of being too loud. It's my big problem.
Oh, that's great. Thank
I
you.
usually have to tone it down. Okay, well, thank you very much for having us. Thank you. So this evening, we're here at the current property at 13 Hale Street, which is currently occupied by the Newburyport Assembly of God. The applicant is Palmer Catholic Coalition. There's a couple of gentlemen here this evening representing them. So in case anybody has any questions that, and to be truthful, I've actually never heard of one of these before, so I'm kind of new to this. If there's any technical questions, please let us know, and gentlemen here can answer them. I understand you have another similar project like this that you've gone through permitting, so you may already have more information than I do. So the property is approximately 5.2 acres, zoned in the I-1 zoning district. It's 2 structures on it, the larger church in front. And it has parking, lawn areas, utilities, that type of thing. It's, as you can see from my little color running out there, the property is basically all around it. We were at the Conservation Commission last night for our initial public hearing. Well, we had a couple of questions, things that they wanted to work on, so we'll continue to the next meeting. This property was originally permitted in 2000, conditions issued for it. They didn't finish all the work they were originally permitted for. Phases. They came back again in 2010. They did a little bit more work. They did some upper replication areas, but they didn't finish that work either. So part of our process going through the Conservation Commission was we had to close out the old orders before we could file new one. So that being said, what the project is, of course, now is a BESS, battery energy storage system, custom Megapack 2 facility. I can't get into specifics for what it's going to do. So I also want to thank, I don't see Caitlin here, but your planner, I believe, she was very helpful. Last time I was here to permit for this board was about 20 years ago, and I haven't seen any of this since then. So she was very helpful to navigate through the whole thing. And it was very, it was interesting to see because everything's on there, and luckily you have everything you need. So what we're going to do is try to put this facility in the back. It's actually a pretty interesting idea. Like I said, if there's any questions for it, we'll do that, but it's actually not a lot of impervious area. These facilities actually go on probably something smaller than your backyard patio. We're only adding 1,000 square feet of concrete pad. There's civil engineering specifications that come with them, and they basically just ask that if they be raised no more than say 12 inches off the ground on a concrete pad, and that they just discharge to the side. We went through a stormwater review with Bill Christensen, who had some questions for us. We responded to them, sent them back to Kelsey, and he said that was fine. The facility is going to be closed in the fence. It's also going to have pea stone and gravel. The groundwater here, as you probably imagine, is not that far. So we're going to try to just take any of the runoff from the impervious surfaces, which again is not much,
Come on.
and just promote any groundwater recharge we can, because this is still considered a commercial project, and we have to apply the DEP standards to the maximum extent that just what we do. But beyond that, we're going to have an electrical line that's shown on the magenta that's going to access out to the poles on Hale Street. We were asked by your town engineer, I can't remember, John Eric White. John asked us for a little bit more information. If somebody can pan, it's in the lower left corner of the plan there. Thank you very much. There you go, over to the left there. So he just asked us, could we give a cross section of how the electric conduits and cables are going to be encased in concrete, and how they're protected and that type of thing. So to get polymer, we used national grid standards, and we used some of the other typical construction practices we've seen for doing this type of work with these spacers that are going to keep all the conduits in place and pour the concrete on. We have a couple of, like I said, little details we're working out with the Conservation Commission as far as the utility poles that are in the front are all going to be within the 25-foot disturb zone. But my understanding is that Kelsey Sullivan actually helped us. There's a couple of variances that we can go for that allow us to do it, because there's really no other way to do it, and it's allowed by your rules and regulations. The 25-foot no disturb zone is shown on that plan, kind of in a sand line that runs kind of like in a circle around the church and around the parking lot. The little light green line, as you can see, is that's all the edge of water vegetated wetlands, and in there is part of the original permitting. There's 3 wetland replication areas. So in the grand scheme of things, this project is actually going to have a lot less impervious area than was originally proposed. So there's less runoff from the site, less runoff volume, that type of thing. All of the work that's going to take place is going to be outside the 25-foot disturb zone, and it's going to be in an already disturbed area. It's a compact gravel parking lot, so we're not going to make any more runoff or any detrimental impact to our neighbors. So with that, I think that covers just about everything. I can just stand there and have a few more questions if you have any. Like I said, there's a couple gentlemen here from Palmer Capital who know more about this if you'd like to ask them.
Any questions from the board?
So just to clarify, the electric line that's going out to the street, how much of that is below grade and how much of it is?
So if everything's below grade until you get to and then it comes up.
So at that first pole, there are 4 poles, so the furthest pole in,
I think
is where it goes up.
first pole in would be above ground and then go down below on the last pole. Yeah.
I have another question. Oh, the other question is is the only material we have this one plan? And
Yeah.
and the stormwater.
That's it. I try to keep it as simple as possible. Less sheets, the better. We did upload all of the all the Megapack 2 guidance facilities, maintenance, and all that. That was all uploaded to the port as well. If you can, and also the fire department asked for an auto turn analysis, which was uploaded, and they also asked for some fire code compliance, stuff like that. And there's a really good company I've ever seen called Code Red. They do a lot of fire variants, codes, that type of thing, and we uploaded all that as well.
It'll be clear in the decision what the
Yeah.
documents are that were actually.
Yeah, because there was a question when this one first came in about several different record plans of the property versus, in this case, this is the record plan showing the improvements being installed. But there are some other things that are in the file that are referenced as relevant to the application itself, but this is the plan that shows, or the only one that can be referred to for purposes of.
Correct. This is the plan we would like to refer to in your decision.
Right.
Actually, I do have another question. Getting back to those poles. It's not the poles. What are there's another line beside the electric line.
Oh, it looks like a dash line and a little dot.
Yeah.
That is the erosion control. So, who's gentleman?
Sorry, yeah, Andy.
Andy.
Yeah, that's it.
In the upper right-hand corner, there's a detail of it. That's a 12-inch mulch sock. So, right to the right.
Oh, sorry.
Right up there, Andy. Thank you so much.
Silt sock.
So that's just, I didn't even know this, but a lot of conservation commissions, they don't like hay bales anymore. They don't like a lot of those things because they have invasives. So mulch socks and silt fence with mulch socks seems to be the way to go. Normally, we would probably use silt fence back, but most of the excavation here is really just going to be in the pavement. So we didn't think that there was any real issue of erosion or that type of thing. But
So this really has to do with the poles then, probably. The pole work.
yeah, so they're gonna have to
Yeah.
bore in for the poles, I assume, and then we just want to make sure we didn't have anything hit the level.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, sir.
Any other questions or comments? I think we'll open up the hearing for public comment then. If anyone has a comment, please come forward. State your name and address. And, we have a couple of minutes for comments. Okay, we will close public comment. Bring it back to the board for any further discussion. And if there is no discussion, I would entertain a motion. Looking at you all.
So I make a motion to grant the requested waivers of the submittal requirements found in section 15E as requested by the applicant.
Second. Given that Jack is there.
Yeah, Jack, can you hear us? Are you able to?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
What's audio?
I can hear you.
We see your hand raised and we see some, the microphone sending something through, but we're not getting any sound.
Yeah, I can hear you 5 by. I'll send you an
We'll
email.
just do it as a show of hands.
Yeah, I would that would work.
So I think we'll just do it as a show of hands.
Just a question. You're including the special condition as part of your motion? Not, there is a special condition that's included.
Yes. I was gonna say, we're doing the two motions
Right.
separate.
Oh. Well, we're just doing the waivers at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll do it with a right show of hands. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Waivers are.
Second motion, to determine the application for site plan review for 13 Hale Street as complete, including the waivers, in the aforementioned submittal.
Second.
Second.
Okay, show of hands again. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. That's passed. Move on then, to Caswell Development, 18 Highland Avenue.
Thank you, Roy.
Two familiar faces.
Now we got development in King Island Ave and Deep Soil Mining Engineering. Couple meetings we had. One. What neighbors and discussion. These small operations, they removed the road last time. Also tweak some more of. Lot. Extended, it was kind of implied, but we extended the perimeter,
I could just run through it, yeah. Steve Sawyer, Millennium Engineering. So, as part of the last meeting, there was this, one of the wishes were, okay, what can we do to increase, buffers? So what we did on lots, 2, 3, and 4, we increased the rear buffer to 35 feet. Setback, the rear setback to 35 feet. Additionally, wrapping around 11 Arlington, the side setback was provided at 10, so we pushed that to 15 feet to give additional buffer around that edge. And then at the end of the property, the side setback of 10 has been increased to 25 feet. So there's been substantial increases to the building offsets around the entire perimeter to the lots on Arlington Street. Additionally, what we did is we, as Jay mentioned, the 10-foot no structure green buffer wraps around the rear and the end of all the lots. Lots 1, 2, 3, and 4 wraps around the entire perimeter. And the additional, let's see, and then another request was, okay, what about the grading for the rear, the grading for rear lots 2 and 3. So and if we jump to the grading plan, you can see that we removed the walls. Walls have been removed. And all the trees now on that bank are maintained. There's some small pine trees and scrub that we'll be removing there. The small scrub, but the mature trees at that location are all to be saved. You can see that banking, the existing grade is to remain at the rear. So those are the major changes that was in response to the planning board and neighbors' concerns that we've done. I think that covers it as far as the changes. One thing of note is on the layout plan, you can see that we're providing 19 street trees with this project. So there's a substantial improvement or substantial tree planting program with this road along the frontage, and then also along the right side of the road to the buffer to the rear, and then 4 or 5 street trees up on Highland Street to improve the streetscape up there. So all these, we made substantial concessions. I could say that I've done, I don't know, it's the fifth courts and lanes permit that I permitted, and this is the first time we've ever made concessions for side setbacks such of this nature. So we've gone far beyond what's typically done for these permits in the past. I think finally, the other thing that Jay conceded is okay, is we're worried about footprints. So you're allowed a 25% building coverage. He's reduced that to 20%. So from 25 to 20% maximum building coverage is another concession made to reduce the impact and the density of this project. And we're talking about density, I would say that the lots, the abutting lots, they're much smaller in the coverages. I would say probably the lot coverages up there are probably, most of them are above what's allowed in zoning. So we're going to be, this, as far as the impact and the density and the coverage, we're far below the surrounding area. Jump in, I think. Yeah. So those are the changes. I think that we've kind of gone quite a way here to make concessions and address neighbors' concerns. And as you can see, we're maintaining much of the trees on the property now. And also, at the lot 4, we've pulled that side, we've increased that side setback more than double at the end of the property to provide a buffer at the end of the project there. And then along with maintaining a good portion of the trees around the perimeter of that lot.
Thank you. Well, it's really appreciate you addressing as many comments as you have. I'd like to ask the board first, if they have questions or comments, but Andy, maybe first you can describe where we are with the zoning amendment?
Yeah, so just for clarification, with the city council passing the zoning amendment for the courts and lanes section, this amendment provides additional flexibility that the planning board doesn't currently have to work with some of the dimensions, specifically reductions that allow the frontage of these structures essentially to be brought closer to the way that's being created, things like that. So it's the reduction really that, sort of added to the board's abilities during the permitting process here. From the applicant, one of the things that's required to take advantage of that piece of it, and that allows some of that to come forward, essentially, addressing some of the concerns about how much is going on at the back of the lots. There's a formal certificate, and I can follow up with the applicant on this piece of it, but there's a formal certificate that would make sense to sign. This is per the zoning act, but it basically says, in essence, agreed to take advantage of this particular new provision that was, brought forward after I filed my application with the board. So in this case, depending on what you're coming back with your revised plan here, the front setback, for instance, being reduced, your plan could correspond to that, and the certificate essentially just indicates that you're taking advantage of that provision to make that adjustment on the plan. That's not something that, up until this point, I think you pointed out as applicant previously, it wasn't something you could incorporate in your plan because it wasn't allowed under the zoning ordinance. So I'm having to follow the formality of that piece of it, but that does give it additional flexibility for both the applicant and the board to try to address both the character and scale of the neighborhood of the homes being created, but also the work towards the back of the properties.
Thank you. So any questions or comments?
Yeah, I was interested to see, had you seen the comments made by Phil Christensen
Yeah.
in his second
Yes,
edition?
yeah, so most of those are all, I think, we have to add a couple of waivers to the plan. I did respond, and most of it's bookkeeping, there's no real substantive change to the design.
Right. But
And
you are,
my response was okay for the final Mylars, all those comments could be addressed
okay,
and
you are
and
in
addressed
agreement
in
with
place of the final Mylars, because it included.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just following up on that one. One of the changes had to do with the vertical relationship between water and sewer. What is is that another waiver you're asking for?
No.
So that is a change.
With water and sewer, you're required, the water and sewer would need to be 10 feet apart, which I believe there wasn't 10. It was 10.
18 feet, 18 inches vertically too.
No, if you're closer than 10 feet, you need 18 inches of
So
vertical.
I thought he was saying that needed to be changed. That doesn't need to be changed.
No, what can be done is in all cases, so what would happen is if we're closer than 10 feet, this is a low pressure sewer. The low pressure sewer would need 7 feet of cover versus 5 feet of cover. So if where we cross, we just cross underneath.
I had a question on which plan this is. It's a grading plan. And so I guess my first question is, there's some significant grading going on between lot 3 and 13 Arlington Street. Why, can you tell us, it's very different than lot 2 and 17 Arlington Street.
So right now, 13 grade with the terrace here that was filled, there's a lot of water being pushed to 11. And there's 11 Arlington was concerned about water flowing onto their property. And also there's no trees there at this point. There's no trees located there. So in order to alleviate the sheet flow from the rear 13 onto 11, we're cutting that down to allow the water to drain down onto our project area where it be controlled.
You can see it through those blue arrows, that's an indication of water flow. Those little squigglies, that's the cut moving water away. As of right now, those are pushing to it.
Yeah, you can see the contours of the flow. It flows from that knoll or that fill area onto 11.
Kind of
And know, the way we see it, there's no trees there now. So let's try and mitigate that and improve the situation for 11 hours.
What is the structure of an organization that will be maintaining the common streets?
So it would be an HOA, homeowners association.
The city requires that I create an HOA or homeowners trust. It has to go, they won't take care of the city, so they have to take ownership of the road and they have to take care of the plowing, see there's a bit of the trash and do it.
So I guess my question, maybe it's a question for Andy, when we do this on an open space residential development, that's kind of part of the approval.
Mhm.
But I actually didn't notice it in here unless I missed it, the requirement to do that.
Oh, actually, we put that in the subdivision. It's coming most from the subdivision component. So at the end of the day, I think, because I imagine there'll be probably a continuance tonight or anything, but it's outstanding if there is anything. But that should be captured in the decision and in the subdivision approval, and the follow through from the applicant to verify that they have established the HOA after the decision, after the planning board's approved it, and before they get the occupancies of the lots.
Yeah, in the past, they won't let me sell a lot until all the things are in place, so basically.
So
the lots-
then when we get into the, Courts and Lanes draft findings, is the court, it talks about the covenant to be entered between the owner or developer. That would be the current, that would be for the homeowner associations is created. But in other places, it talks about, the, maintenance of the trees by the property owners. So that probably should refer to the homeowners association rather than the property owners.
It probably makes sense to refer just the HOA and leave it there, but we could get finer grained depending on how much we want to cover it, either in the plans or in the written decision and the documents, but assigning that responsibility on each lot, essentially, to me, it makes most sense to just keep everything to the HOA and leave that there.
That's why it's,
Yeah.
because it almost suggests, the way it's written right now, that each
Okay.
lot is responsible for it.
Ah,
And I wanted to make
and
sure.
you want to make sure, yes,
Yes.
I agree, yeah.
And, okay, that's as far as I have right now.
Much of the conversation we had at our last hearing was about the potential benefit of moving had discretion over the front lot line. And so now we're in a different place than we were even the last time with the ordinance. So the question is, how do we have that discussion, right? Is it something, obviously you're aware of it as the applicant, what does that mean in real terms now that you have that available?
Since that all came up, and we're still joint stuff, even though you guys got the power of that. Honestly speaking, I'm fine with this the way it is. If you guys want to give me relief from the front, I'll take it. So if it means you're gonna give me relief from the front and have to restrict it further, don't want to do that. So it's kind of right. If you guys want to give me relief from the front, cycles, because quite honestly, like someone's on with 5 setback, it's a great, but generally speaking, design wise, the garage is 25 foot anyways, because you're gonna have 2-tier cars. I prefer not to have the 25, but if the situation is, Jay, we'll give you 10 and you make it back 15. Kind of what I am with it.
Okay, no, appreciate it.
So on that subject, while we're talking, there's been a lot of progress made relative to tree preservation, and I think we appreciate very much the efforts that you have made. There's a few more trees that have come up in discussions with the abutters, and they're all on what I would call the south side of the lane. They're adjacent to 16 Highland.
Yeah.
And just to finish my point, again, if we were to acknowledge the 15-foot front yard setback, and if you left all of your buildable footprints exactly where they are in plan, but you moved that lane 10 feet to the north, would you be able to preserve some of those existing trees along the 16 Island Avenue crossing?
Yeah. So with the, I looked at that, I guess it was a comment that came from the butter to that, that side of the road. Our original design, we were taking those trees anyway. I think Jay wasn't, he might have been a little unclear about that. We did move the road, the edge of the road was moved 3 feet towards the south. And really the center line only moved 2 feet because 1 foot was we widened from 20 to 22 feet. So it was only 3 feet, 3 feet of, or like 2 feet of the road moving in that direction. Now, if we didn't pull up the original plans, you can see there's, I think that's you can see we're still maintaining the conifer, everything on that property line up. If you zoom in there, and there's the evergreens there that are all going to be maintained. So there's an 18-inch that's going to be maintained. Now, the tree behind that's shown to be taken, that is the only tree that we had indicated to remain in the original design, but I'm not sure if it was within the root base, that the roots were within 3 feet of the we're cutting the roots to 3 feet away.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is if you took the paved lane and if we reduce the front yard setbacks by 10 feet, could you move the paved lane 10 feet to the north and create more of a buffer?
Well, it's going to happen there, but unfortunately what happens is typically your garage is, you lose the ability to park a car in front of your garage.
I get that.
Yeah.
That says something then about the location of the garage relative to that, but I guess the question is, can you move that lane north and try to protect some of those existing trees there as well? I know you can't protect all of them.
Well, yeah, so I guess you could move it north. I could say that you can see those 3 trees, there's 3 trees there. You got there's this 18 that we're maintaining.
Yeah.
And then there's one right behind that. I believe that's a 22. The 22, the 20, and the 18 could probably be maintained. The road, our road.
10.
Yeah, but the thing is,
So like, spatially speaking, yeah, if you say, oh, we'll give you 10 this way if you slide forward, well, what happens is I creep further on the back. I could stagger the house in the garage, which would work. But, if we can massage it, go like 4 feet, I don't think 10,
Yeah.
but the reality is, we are planting new street trees there. What I mean? So those, no one's taking the trees off, but the new trees go in.
So I would say we can't move it 10. We wouldn't say move it 10. It would impact it. It would impact.
Okay.
Could we,
We can move it 10.
But can you move it enough?
we could, we could probably, if we gave 4 feet, we gave 4 feet to that, the trees would have a better chance.
I guess the answer is we gotta figure out how far we gotta give it, tell you guys, to save these trees, you guys gotta give me this.
Yeah.
That's how we do it.
We could look.
I can't shoot from there. Theoretically.
Couple of other questions then. The green buffer, the 10-foot green buffer, can you describe
So what that is,
what
that's
the plan is there?
so by zoning requirements, technically someone can put a shed within 6 feet of the property line, doesn't need a permit. Someone can put an accessory structure, under 22, the 22, but basically a 2-car garage. And that can be within 6 feet, 5. Okay, so what that is, and I saw Phil's comment, that will come as a no structure zone, green buffer zone. Doesn't mean I'm planting arborvitae's, doesn't mean I'm not planting arborvitae's. But what it's saying is gonna restrict that 10-foot perimeter from someone by right to be able to drop a shed there or pop an accessory structure because they're allowed to do that. The mechanism is geez, how do we enforce it? Well, that's happening called the building inspector. You know, feels that someone putting an easement. You can't really call it an easement, because an easement is a mechanism to allow someone to cross the property. The easement is somebody. The easement, that's staying with the property.
And these plans of record will be recorded to the board. So, it's recorded at the registry of deeds, so that there's a indication of that 10-foot area.
So
So
you're,
really that doesn't require these.
you're saying it's not a landscape screen.
No, it's basically,
It's a
like a no
dimensional.
it's no. So, what it is these lots are allowed rights by R2 zoning. These are R2 lots. So basically my little checklist I have there, those are all the things that I'm willing to give up that are allowed by R2. One of the things I'm willing to give up is, I understand someone down the road may want to take a Reed's Ferry shed. It's 6 feet off the property. Now it's going to protect.
Sure.
That's, it's pretty much protecting trying to protect. I look at it this way, we're going through and I'm basically not changing it that much. I mean, I know what I'm thinking, generally speaking, I'm saving just about everything in there. I'm clearing the absolute minimum that I have to do the development. And so it's like, we're saving the perimeter, we're saving a lot of, we're saving most of everything. Can I save everyone? Yeah, I guess no, I can save everyone and be fine.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think maybe the misnomer is we're calling it a green buffer. It's really
It's
a no build buffer.
Well, originally we called it green buffer, and then I said we should call it no structure. Just turn it into like a nomenclature.
Because I recall the discussion was how do you define it? Can someone put a shrub in there? Could they remove one? That's not.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, I leave it, so, you can't put a fence to the problem, and let people put fence up.
Yeah,
Stuff like that.
just to the question that Bob asked and Brian's comment there, I mean, yes, agreed, what the board's getting at here, just that we want to be as clear as possible at the end of the day about what each of these things on the plan represents. So whether it's adjusting the title in reference to something or clarifying if plantings are in there, we'll just, I think the applicant will have to work with us to make sure that there's clarity based on where the board is, along this, that the plan is consistent with that. We then, working with the board in the office, will try to help. If there's any written conditions, we try to put everything on the plan because that's the clearest for everybody going forward. But if there's anything that has to be put into a written condition, to clarify or to reference, anything specific here, we craft that language for the decision itself, but it's preferable if the plans that Steve is preparing or adjusting here is as clear as possible and consistent about the language and the reference call outs so that there is less ambiguity or things that have to be captured in a written condition.
Yeah, agreed.
So, just one last thing on trees. And I think there's more experience with precedents related to this than I have on the board, but I believe that, there needs to be documentation related to protection of the trees that you are saving. And that protection would be both long-term and during construction. And I don't know if you've worked with an arborist in the past to kind of identify the health of the trees, but I think, we've got to talk about, that documentation and how that gets built into the plan going forward. So there's assurances that those trees
I
have.
don't want to open that can.
Sorry?
Norway maples, if an arborist go in and look at Norway maples, yeah. Be careful. It's a lot of those trees are invasive species. They're not supposed to be, it's supposed to be. I'm just saying, be careful, we ask. Just go in and say, Norway, and rip the trees out. We have them on the plan, they know it, they get disease and they die. I don't have a problem with it, I'm just saying, sometimes unintended consequences.
I think the long-term goal is to
Agreed,
preserve.
I'm not trying to get this out.
Heard of others who have been down this road before, in terms of the details. But I hear what you're saying.
during construction, one thing that it could be added to the plan or supplemented any sort of markup on here, but in terms of whether there's some sort of a tape line or barrier, right, tree protection fencing, something just to make it clear for the contractor who's doing the work, that that's where they should stop, because they won't be looking, unfortunately, always at the plans in that great a detail. So maybe if the surveyor is, before they start the work, is putting something, orange construction fencing or something, that'll just make it clear that they should go beyond that.
Okay, one last item, and then we'll open this up for public comment. We talked at the last meeting about house footprints, for providing more information. And I think what you said is your preference is to sell the lots and to have custom homes built. So I'm remembering your initial set of plans where you had building.
Well, that's another, too much information to it.
What I'm getting at is, rather than go down the road of identifying house plans, architectural style, all of that, what we're most concerned about is the scale of the houses, the location of the houses on these lots, and if you could provide a footprint diagram. The other controls on that already exists are height limitations and the setbacks that we've talked about. You've got 20% lot coverage. I think that kind of gets us where we need to be in terms of understanding the volume that the houses could occupy. And I think that the most critical parcel is parcel 4, because that has a different configuration potentially than the others. It has
Quite honestly, my best the possible bit challenging with all those major setbacks.
So, I mean, I guess what I would ask is, could you take a look at building footprints
Yeah,
related to those
it
parcels?
maximum gross square foot.
Yeah, yeah. And then we've got height limitations that.
Height never is resolved. Yeah, 35 feet. Yeah. I can do that.
Okay.
And I know early on with the whole ADU thing, it just was like, you're showing, the first plan was showing your rights under it. That's just the path that you put ADUs, so like, hey, let's just throw an ADU in. So it turned into a fiasco. I wish it never did. I wish no one told me to do that. That's another learning experience. I understand we won't be in.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to open it to public comment now. Further will be the few. So if you have a comment, please come forward, state your name and address, and please try to limit your comments to a couple of minutes if you can.
Good evening, my name is Beth Nash. I live at 19 Arlington Street. Thank you for your continued attention to concerns of the neighbors. The proposed development is going to have significant impact on our and on the natural environment. As you well know, the proposed development requires a special permit, and thus the planning board has the ability to make specific conditions that would be memorialized to prevent future violations. We appreciate that the plans dated February 25th are responsive to some of our concerns. However, some concerns still need to be addressed. Some, have just been mentioned this evening, so I'm going to try to be brief. My husband and I submitted another public comment on March 2nd, so you have that. You had a chance to read through it. We agree that a tree preservation plan by a certified arborist must be a legally binding. The plan should clearly indicate the trees to be preserved and establish critical root zone protection measures during excavation and construction. The plan must be recorded as a continuing condition on the new lots to prevent future destruction of the trees. And the tree preservation plan should include penalties for violations. As was just touched on, as requested numerous times, We think the developer should plan to provide a plan which shows the potential massing. It's hard for me to visualize what these houses will look like as we look out our back doors and windows. It would like be helpful to me. It's hard for me to envision the height massing. The plans should restrict yard and house lighting to ensure that abutters don't have light shining right into their home and to minimize neighborhood light pollution. The special permit should memorialize the preservation of the existing slope behind lots 2 and 3. Now hearing that the slope behind lot 3 is going to be changed, that's something that I did not understand looking at the plan. We think that the shrubs on the slope should be preserved along with the trees as a way to minimize tree root destruction and to stop erosion of the slope. A 10-foot green buffer is a minimal response to our concerns about impact. I'm glad that it's there, but we would appreciate it if the planning board would require an increase to this buffer area, the no build area. The rear yard setback is increased from 25 feet to 30 feet at lots 2, 3, and 4, which is an improvement. But to be equitable, this should also be provided at lot 1. And it's worth noting that lot 1 is the second largest of the 4 lots with over 16,000 square feet. And lastly, I just want to say that we are very pleased that the city council approved the amendment for some lanes and they waived the requirement for a second hearing. And I think this sends a clear directive to the planning board and to the developer that efforts should be made to relax dimensional requirements, which will result in site plans that are more responsive to neighborhood concerns. So thank you so much for your effort.
State Agent Chico McMillan. I'm the abutter at 16 Highland Avenue. Appreciate you having read my letter, taking note of the trees there. I guess just to be clear, the December plan did show the trees being preserved. That said, we actually support this development. We support the plans as they were in December. I think the developers have gone out of their way to try to make a lot of accommodations. And I think what we're seeing now is the challenges of extensive accommodations, because my main concern is having enough space between that lane and our fence line to support mature trees. If it's the ones that are there today, that's fine, or if it's newly planted ones. But what I'm concerned about is a newly planted tree growing into the fence, pushing up our driveway, which is immediately on the other side. So if we can get a little more space there, I really appreciate it. I think you're seeing that the challenges of having these continually extending backyards means it's hard for us to even take advantage of minimizing or taking advantage of the flexibility you have to minimize the front yard setback, right? Like the whole thing is pushing and shoving backward and forward. And I just think it's important to think about equity to all of the abutters and the impact on everybody who has to sit next to this. Like I said, I actually support this development. I think it should be residential. I think the plans are more than fair. I think extensive work with drainage, a few more feet between the lane and the, just to make sure that we don't end up with a damaged fence or damaged driveway. Thank you very much.
My name's Glenn Casey, 19 Arlington Street. I hadn't planned on speaking tonight, but I heard something from the developer about the risk of having an arborist go into this location. If you look around Newburyport, it's loaded with Norway maples. I don't see these trees any less efficient in all the ways that a mature tree can be efficient. So I think it's ridiculous to say we're going to take those Norway maples down. The city planted an invasive English oak in front of my house. I don't care. It's a great tree. These doorway maples have been there for 50 years. They predate the parking lot and the doctor's office. So I think, you know, arborists or not, keep the trees. Thank you.
Hi, Beth Trout, 144 Low Street. I just want to thank you all. We have been here for this project many, many times. And I'm hoping that our new Courts of Lanes Amendment can give you a tool in your toolkit to help with this. I think we've really seen that this type of flexibility is needed. And I also really very much appreciate the developer's flexibility on this as well. Thank you. You all have, it's in your court now, and I hope, and I hope that you're able to come up with a balanced solution that really helps the abutters on all sides and comes to something fair. I think the great thing here is that every person in this room and involved with this project, counselors, planning board members, the developer, the neighbors, we are all Newburyporters and we all really wanted the best. So I think this is how we're going to get it by working together. So thank you very much for your time.
Any other comment?
Thank you, Chairman Crew, members of the planning board. My name is Mary Jo Vermo. I am a co-owner of Arlington Street. I've been with my husband, Stephen. I submitted a second letter to you on March 2nd concerning the subdivision at 18 Highland Ave. I'd just like to highlight, I hope you've had a chance to read it, and if you have, thank you very much. I just want to highlight a few matters that are really important to me. Our property sits at the base of the hill upon which the proposed subdivision will be built. We have already experienced serious drainage issues. So any alteration to soil, grading, tree canopy uphill will have direct and lasting consequences. We have lived this already. This is not speculative. It's a function of topography and water flow. I'm well aware that Mr. Caswell has planned some stormwater mitigation measures. However, replacing an established natural system with an engineered design based on modeling, even though it's completely well intended, comes with risks. If the system doesn't perform as expected, the greatest impact will be felt in my backyard. The proposed 25 setback at 5 Arlington is a real welcome start. Thank you. It will serve a vital functional purpose, providing absorption capacity, root stabilization, etc. While this setback may be greater than elsewhere in the subdivision, I am asking, and this is justified by the topography. It's a matter of sound planning, not subjective preference. I'm asking that the buffer not be reduced in width or effectiveness from where it stands right now. While I am in favor of my fellow abutters advocating for setback improvements, they should not come at the expense of what has been proposed to 5 Arlington. Shrinking the side setback adjacent to my property would concentrate impact precisely where the site's topography already deters. And in my dreams, I would ask you to consider increasing that, but I know the realities. Lastly, if the board relies on tree preservations to support its decision, and I think this has been addressed, that preservation must be legally protected in perpetuity. And again, this has been addressed. This, I too say this is not in opposition to the development. I get it. It's a request that we continue to work hard and reflect the physical realities of the site in any protections relied upon in granting relief being permanent and enforced. Thank you, and I really appreciate all the time you put in this. And thank you for your service to.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for your time this evening. Details that matter in this plan. There have been some narratives around this plan, which I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with. And frankly, I understand. First, the term by right has been including my board members at the last meeting. If this project was by right, we're talking about the road, none of us would be here. Mr. Caswell would be building by right. The fact that we're here is this project not by right. Furthermore, there's been talk of removing people's property in open forum and also lecture. No one is taking away Mr. Caswell's property. He is asking for something extra, something that the normal property owner does not have. So please, just whatever the decision is, please do not, we should not disguise this. This is by right. It is not by right. None of us would be here. And this is not taking away Mr. Caswell's property. He is literally asking for a special. Let's talk about trees. We've been talking about trees ever since this process began. As of the plan today, there is nothing other than a 1979 document protecting the trees specifically on lot. Once 18 Arlington is raised to the ground, Mr. Caswell has the total right, to get property right, total right to remove every tree on that property. If the board is going to use trees as a reason to make decisions, whether that is for the street, whether that's for my friends and neighbors at 5 Arlington, I'm okay with it. But it has to stand in perpetuity. And one of the reasons I brought up that my good friends and neighbors at 5 Arlington have a 35-foot setback and a 25-foot setback, while I have a 15-foot setback, and that disproportionately adversely impacts me. One of the reasons I brought that up is either the board can trees, which is your decision, and you can make decisions based on that, or we don't care about trees. In which case, let's at least be honest. Once the special permit is issued, given what's happening, given the proposal today, Mr. Caswell can clear every tree. And if that's what we want as a board, as a community, that's okay. I'm just pointing out. If I'm wrong, I'd be happy to be corrected. That's my understanding. Let's talk about borders. Density. At the last meeting, it was the board made the request to Mr. Caswell to show up. Mr. Caswell said no because he didn't want to be untruthful. Okay, the board is allowed to make reasonable requests. My question to the board is, do we think that footprints are an unreasonable request? Has that been remedied tonight? If we do feel that footprints are unreasonable to ask for, if the board's, one of the board's stated goals is to make sure that density is contained to preserve the character of the neighborhood, how can the board rule on density? We have no idea what the density is. I understand Mr. Caswell's point. Right? He doesn't want to be untruthful. I get it.
one remedy, which I suggested in my letter, that I posted last Friday, which I would encourage you to read or ask you to please read, is whatever the building envelopes are, and I understand that the building envelopes are shifted. Not only should the main structures be limited to that building envelope, but any accessory structures, whether it's sheds, garages, be limited. So at least then, we as a neighborhood and you as a board understand what the density is going to look like, at least with regards to buffers to the neighbor's property. Finally, I've written it 3 times, and I understand that you don't have to respond to public comment. Keep writing it, and this is the second time I've mentioned it verbally. There is a drainage pipe going from 11th Street onto Lot 4. Mr. Caswell has indicated that on his plans and accounted for that. But a line item on the plan, whether that is the trees, right? There's nothing attached to the trees right now. Whether that is setbacks, what do these setbacks mean? There's a lot of different setbacks, it's not clear to me. And also the pipe, none of these are necessary. Our third time, using time verb that the board attached a provision for special permit, ensuring that the drainage pipe from Lot 4, it's drainage pipe from Arlington 11 onto Lot 4, functions in perpetuity. Thank you for your time.
Any other comments? Okay, I'll close public comment. Back to the board for discussion. We've had a few items addressed tonight. Talked about potential relocation of the lanes related to the trees along the 16 Highland Avenue property line. Talked about the nature of the green buffer. We've talked about a tree plan and view of those trees for protection both long-term and during construction. Talked about house footprints and establishing footprint and massing for individual lots. All of those, I think, in the context of what's going on with the zoning amendment, I believe, Mr. Caswell, we can continue those conversations. Does anyone else have any specific points that we need to carry?
I think that covers what we talked about.
I had a question about the reduction from maximum allowable lot coverage from 25% to 20%. That's presented in a cover letter. Is there anything that is, how does that get implemented?
Yeah, I think it's actually kind of correlates to a comment that was in offer as well, which is, and related to public comment was given a moment ago. I think it would be good as possible to both call out on the plans themselves, a notation. This goes back in part to, unfortunately, to Steve.
It's actually in the zoning table on the front.
Yeah. So just making sure it's there, and the other elements that are being talked about here, and I'm happy to work with, Steve, the office can try to complete the meeting. Take a look at the plans as they're being modified, but just to try to look at the labeling for each of these areas, the comments that have been made both by board members of the general public. Either way, regarding the details, bring those, aside, the decision up to the board, making sure that the call outs and the clarity as to what's required, on a perpetuity basis, is clear. So whether it's the, edge not having any disturbance to that, or where the building envelopes can go. Steve's already got some call outs in there, but I think it might be just a few tweaks to those things, clarifying text perhaps being added or modified, just to make it as clear as possible. Based on the concerns that have been raised here, there isn't any ambiguity going forward about which trees are being preserved, what buffer area can or cannot have something, whether it's in a structure or, trees being removed or whatever it may be. So we're happy to take a look at that in the office to help with these, if it helps to kind of prove the best we can, the clarity there. But that would go, I think, hand in hand with any kind of special conditions if they're already on the project.
Kind of related to that, in a way, just in terms of trying to make sure that everything that we expect to happen is memorialized in decisions. So one of the purposes of courts and lanes special permit is to encourage the protection and preservation of mature trees. So I think that anything that we can do to, not just show it on the plan, but have something stricter than showing it on a plan would kind of give more comfort to some of the others surrounding areas.
Sure. I mean, I definitely think having, if there's two things that come to mind, again, just what I could offer that, I guess one thing is perhaps having, as I mentioned earlier, some sort of a line for the contractor that's depicted on the plans that could be carried through, just to show where there's sort of no disturb or, construction activity can happen against or getting closer to those trees. And that may be a little bit distinct from, say, a building setback envelope, right? But, having something to that effect, and I think perhaps to your point, there's an actual written condition as well as the plan itself. Again, trying to make it explicitly clear some of those
Yeah, I
details.
think one of the things I'm sort of thinking about is how do we replace the condition that was on the variance with a modified, permanently protected.
Yeah, and I should clarify here, permanent is just to the extent it's helpful at all. Permanent protection, covenant on the property, and the concern was raised by folks, understandably, looking back at the prior variance decision from years ago. Yeah, and this actually came up in another project years ago, I noticed elsewhere in the city, but the board at the time and the applicant at the time, they hadn't agreed to at the time memorialize something recorded in perpetuity on the property like a conservation restriction. What was done in this other instance and sort of done here, going back years, was a condition in the permit, meaning it's tied to the use of the activity of the property. So if that use changes or goes away, that condition goes. And that's where the concern I think was raised here. So here, the condition of the approval, conditions of approval of the plans are going to memorialize that in one format or another in the plan or the decision itself. If there's a desire to make that in perpetuity beyond something like this, that's a different discussion. But I think my understanding is that you're probably talking about memorializing it for the life of these homes that are going to be there. These things need to be protected and kept and maintained per the plan in perpetuity. So if there's a future homeowner there, the real effect of that in practical reality is if an abutter sees something that's happening and says, that doesn't look right, the zoning administrator of the city would be the person to step in here essentially because it's an enforcement of a permit that was issued under the zoning ordinance. So that's the way that these issues have been handled before. It's happened a few other instances. These sort of things come up and that's the mechanical way that will be addressed.
And another question that I have has to do with the stormwater at the foot of the lane. There's kind of a long extension of lot 4 that goes down into the woods there. And I'm just wondering why that is part of lot 4 instead of being part of the common area. It's something that I think we should think about because, there is an easement around that the depression. I'm not sure what the technical term for that is right there. But there's nothing about anything that goes beyond it. And I know we've been reassured by Steve that nothing's going to go beyond it, but just in case something does happen, I think that's what people are concerned about. The fact that water flooding may increase, storms may increase. Should we be looking at who's responsible for what goes on further down in that little arm of lot 4?
Did you say that's an easement? That's there, or is that part of the homeowners association?
There is an easement that is around the area of the level spread. But I don't know that there's an easement that continues beyond that. And that's the natural flow of water. So
Are you suggesting there should be more of a drainage?
I'm just wondering why that's not common land instead of being part of
One thing I will offer on that, I guess as best I can, I found there are situations in which making a separate parcel like that, sometimes in the context of an HOA, is a little bit more difficult for folks like the assessor's office, for instance. So I might be inclined, for instance, to keep it attached to a lot per se, but to keep some sort of restriction or make that clarity. It may not always be beneficial or may result in other problems for others when we have a separate parcel. That's carved off the development.
We do have lot 5. Lot 5 is a separate parcel, so just the same type of thing.
Understood. Yeah, understood.
So I guess thinking about moving the setback line, the front setback line closer to the lane would be a major thing. Looking at the 20% lot coverage, that gives me a lot more reassurance, because that means that those, the squares, the lot width minimum box, the building footprint is definitely gonna be smaller than all of those. Because they're all more than 20%. Except for lot 4.
I wanted to respond to the comment about, lot 1 and the rear yard setback and the concern that it's not equitable with the other lot. I actually look at it from the other point of view in terms of equitable building footprint. Lots 2 and 3 and actually 4 all have much greater north-south depth. And I think reducing that rear yard setback or increasing it anymore starts to really handicap the buildable footprint for lot number 1. So that's why I would support keeping it the way it is and not making it equal. I just think it's different, and there's less opportunity there for construction. So with that, can we talk about a motion for continuance so we can continue conversation on all of these bullet points?
Yeah, and my question there would be the date, if that we would continue to, whether the next meeting 3/18 or the first one in April 1st.
Yeah.
For 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
We're on 2 weeks. We might have to keep it.
Keep the pressure.
Okay.
And materials have to be in next week.
Yeah, correct. And then the applicant, if that applicant can't take that, Steve can let us know and we'll. Yeah.
I move to continue the special permit application and definitive subdivision approval application for 18 Highland Avenue to March 18th, 2026.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? We won the 18th. Thank you very much. I think we can move on to 93 State Street, Institution for Savings. How are you tonight?
Recognize important that my phone didn't work, so I'll try to project like the previous presenter did. So for the record, I'm Adam Costa with the firm of Mead, Kellerman and Costa with us here in Newburyport. Here before you this evening on behalf of the Institution for Savings. We were last before you 4 weeks ago. The application is an application for an amendment to a special permit. And as you'll all recall, the basis for the amendment is that the radiator that was constructed, the new addition to the Institution for Savings building at 93 State Street is non-compliant with the original approved plans in terms of size, massing, and we have presented to you different options at your February 4th meeting for adjustment, either maintaining the existing location of the radiator, doing work with parapets and things of that sort, or an alternative to relocate the generator, the radiator altogether to the existing pre-existing addition to the main building, which we refer to as the 80s addition or the 80s building. You sent us away back on February 4th with a couple of different marching orders. The first was that board members, at least 1 or 2 of you, had asked for additional information about the due diligence that we had done before we made it appear. We I had represented to you that we had looked at a variety of different options. I just cited them in a general sense, but we had looked at a variety of different options, mitigation packages, so to speak, and you wanted some additional information on that. And then specifically, you'd asked for additional information. One of those options, which I had indicated I wasn't sure it was all that feasible anyway, from a cost perspective or otherwise, but that was the replacement of the existing radiator with a low profile, low silhouette style radiator. I indicated at the time that we had had verbal conversations with the company with which we work, the engineer, and it had been told to us that that was not feasible, but we hadn't presented anything. So we submitted the package to you with correspondence back on, I think the letter was February 24th. I didn't make these first couple of documents. I'm going to reference part of the PowerPoint presentation because they're in about size 8 font and you wouldn't be able to read them up there, but I know that you have them in your packages. But we presented 2 documents. One is just a bit of a chart of a spreadsheet. This document shows some of the alternatives, the mitigation packages that we had considered, and then evaluates them based on various criteria: effectiveness, early feasibility determination, potential impact from a cost perspective for the institution for savings, and then some initial direction and conclusions that we reached when we evaluated these a couple of months or more. The additional document we provided addressed more specifically, and in fact, it has some company plans, addressed more specifically the low profile or low silhouette option. We have a document here entitled Memo. It's from WSP, which is the structural engineer with which we work, and it refers to this alternate remote radiator on the roof of the new addition. It provides some accompanying plans for what that looked like, and I'm no engineer, so I'm not even attempt to speak specifically to the terminology within the memo, but I will summarize it and say the conclusion in the memo is that based upon the way in which the addition was constructed, there simply wouldn't be sufficient load-bearing capacity to replace the existing radiator with a radiator that has a greater footprint. I'll also point out to you something that's not in the structural engineer's letter, but it is something that I had referred to when I was before 4 weeks ago, and that is that the low-profile radiator certainly is shorter from a height perspective, but even if we were able to replace the existing radiator with a low-profile radiator, it would still be visible on the roof because it's not going to be entirely hidden beneath the parapet. And of course, the mass would just be greater because it's much wider and much deeper than the proposed or the existing radiator that's on the roof today. With that said, what we did shift to and what is reflected in the PowerPoint presentation is we attempted to further expand upon the option we had shown you before, which is to relocate radiator to the 80s style. So if you go to the next slide, these first 2 slides, this one and the next one, are slides you've seen before. We just wanted to start out with them to sort of refresh your recollection as to the visibility. We refer to these as tangram 3D drawings or renderings, effectively superimposing on actual photographs of the Institute for Safety building and the additions to that building, superimposing the relocation of the radiator to the 80s addition, together with the sort of stucco wall that we propose being constructed as a surround to provide for some aesthetic shielding or buffering of the visibility of that radiator. You can see it is I don't want to say invisible, but not nearly as visible in either of these tangram photographs as is the existing radiator on the new addition, the new build. What you had requested, both board members and board had requested, is that we also provide line drawings, essentially elevation drawings, roof plans, and accompanying sections that would dimension the exact location or relocation of the radiator, height, width, footprint within the roof footprint of the 80s style addition, so that you could get a better sense. Again, I think the photographs probably give you the best sense of what the visibility will be, but so that you will see for certain the parameters within which will be required to work with actual dimensions on the plan. So if we go to the next several pages, again, the title sheet says roof plans, elevations, and cross section. So this is the roof plan. You can see here the relocation is proposed there, and maybe you can zoom in a bit. So
yeah, I can
see.
Let me know if you want me to pin it anywhere.
Sure, that's good. There, so you can sort of see the relocated radiator. Bottom left corner, there's a statement that arrow points to the sort of shaded gray area. And you can see that the face screen wall will align with the return face of the 1980s edition. We've got the galvanized steel frame, and you can see the existing generator exhaust, existing generator supply, and return vents are shown on the roof to the right. A point I do want to make, I think that there maybe even was a question asked, if not by staff, but maybe by board members, the appurtenances to the radiator, conduits, piping, wiring, things of that sort. Is any of that going to be visible on the exterior of the building? The answer is it's not. And when we get to the latter part of this presentation, when we talk about timing for this work to be done, insofar as the board is inclined to approve it, you'll see in the timing, in the timeline that we're going to present how we intend to proceed. But we're going to get the work done even in advance of receiving the curbing upon which this radiator will sit. We're going to do the necessary work. Jeff Kaplan, in fact, is here in attendance with us tonight to the extent that you have questions, because he's the contractor that'll be doing the work. We're going to do that work in advance so that everything is sort of plug and play, ready to go, more or less, once the materials arrive on site. But there will be nothing that will be visible from the exterior facade. So this is the roof plan. The next several plans are the elevation plans. Again, these being two-dimensional, they're a bit deceiving, because number one, you see, if you compare these to the Tangram 3D drawings that we or renderings that we provided, it does look to a certain extent like maybe this is somewhat more visible, peeking above that stucco wall. That, of course, is because you're looking at it straight on in 2D, and you're not looking at it from the street level, which if you're standing on either of the adjacent roadways. But nevertheless, this is what's required for purposes of building permits submittal and even for your issuance of a permit to ensure that we're going to work within the envelope that we've committed to. You can see these are dimension plans, and the dimensions are shown there. This is just, again, the north elevation, so a different angle, like you can see here. You've got that sort of stuff enclosure. See the portion of the relocated radiator that sort of peaks above it. And this is the Prospect Street elevation shown here. Again, you can see that the thick screen wall and these fascia. And then this is the section, sort of the cross section, so you can sort of see the actual construction that's in that. It's not there, but the surround will be there, so nobody will quite see that unless you're standing next to it. And I think this is the last elevation. This is the west elevation. So time. So you'll see on this next sheet, the proposed timeline. It may be difficult to read. I can't even quite read it, but I've got it in front of me. So you'll see, this is what we anticipate, but we are being, I guess I could say, somewhat conservative here, because we don't want to overcommit to the board, make statements that we can do something in a more expeditious timeframe than we anticipate we might be able to. The curbing is really what takes the most time, because we've got to order that, and we've been informed by the company that the turnaround, could be as short as 4 to 6 weeks, or it could be as long as 12 months. And so you'll see here the longest bar on this timeline graph shows the ordering of the curbing running from March of 2026 into June of 2026. We can, as I had referenced before, have Caswell Mechanical do the exploration prep with respect to things like the conduits and the pipes and wires. They can do some of that work more or less immediately in terms of preparing for the relocation to the 80th edition. But everything else on the graph, as you can see, the roof prep, the crane radiator, the final hookups, the re-roofing and framing, and then the final stucco trim, all of that has to await the arrival of the curbing, because the curbing needs to be installed on the 80s style roof before it can happen. I think we do have a bit of an overlap with the roof prep, because as soon as we know that the curbing arrival is imminent, we can begin with the roof preparation. We're not going to begin too far in advance. And so the time frame as shown here takes us out through the middle or end of July 2026. It is certainly our hope. I'm sure that it's your hope that we're going to be able to do this much more quickly. But this is what we propose. I think that the next sheet just sort of shows it in a different format. Same items here, same tasks, and they show approximate start dates. Again, the curbing will be ordered. We are hopeful, and maybe a bit presumptuous, thinking that you might approve this, hoping you might approve this tonight. But if you do approve it, then we would be prepared curbing as soon as tomorrow. We're not gonna, field period, we want to get that rolling. We can begin the next, and as soon as next week, and then we'll just await the arrival of the curbing, which won't be later. That's, I think that may be the last slide. So certainly happy to answer any questions. I did have an opportunity, I'll just say this before I rest. I did have an opportunity to review the staff report that Mr. Ford prepared. You'll see in the director's comment, and this is the consequence of some discussions that were had, discussions that have been had with city officials, including your zoning enforcement officer, your zoning administrator, as well as with Mr. Ford. Of course, this building is ready to go. But the building has not received the certificate of occupancy because of this issue involving the radiator. So what we're hopeful the board will consider, insofar as the board is prepared to approve the relocation, is allowing the issuance of a temporary certificate of occupancy, or at least indicating that you have no objection to it. We understand the board doesn't issue the certificate of building to allow the building to be occupied while we're awaiting compliance with the timeframe that we just proposed. There are some suggestions, I think mostly that were made through Mr. Port as to how we might commit to doing certain things in the meantime, so that the board is continuously and consistently in the loop, as is your staff. Everything from bi-weekly reports as to the status, the anticipated arrival of the curbing, mechanical work being done, installation being done. We're certainly happy to do that. But again, the concept of awaiting any sort of issuance of the certificate of occupancy for what could be another 4 or 5 months is significant hardship. So we ask for the board's indulgence and consideration of that option, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. We certainly like to, or we'll be happy to answer any questions that board members have about any of the preceding drawings, plans, or time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
2 questions. One, in terms of the height of the radiator, are you comfortable with that? You're not going to have any surprise in terms of the curbing and so forth?
We are. You know, you might imagine we don't want to come back before you any more than you want us to. And so we've had some discussions over the past month, you know, with the various parties involved, determining the requisite height of the curbing, the requisite clearance, particularly, you know, having these discussions over the course of the past month amidst a couple different blizzards and intermediate snowstorms. You know, one of the reasons that you need the curbing, you need the elevation, is to ensure that snow and snow drifts are not building up and preventing airflow beneath the radiator. So we've had those discussions. We've given ourselves, we think, is a bit of a buffer, but not much of a buffer, but the buffer that we think we might need. In an ideal world, maybe when all said and done, we're somewhat shorter than what we here, but we are comfortable that what we provide gives us the ability to do what we need to do and install this radiator in accordance with manufacturer specifications.
Because I'm comfortable about looking at this in terms of the relationship of the top of the radiator to the peak of the adjacent roof, most clearly seen from the west elevation. So as long as that doesn't pop above the peak of the roof, I think that's helpful. I'd be interested to know your thoughts on the proposed condition number 3 that says that the city can pull your temporary occupancy. I almost think that's not, I'm not sure that's realistic, and I don't know how that would work. Is that language that you had talked about with the city, or?
We did. I believe we love it if you eliminate it. It doesn't do us anything. Practically speaking, we tried to build in some mechanism, some process to avoid it. So it does indeed say that the building commissioner may revoke any temporary occupancy permit that was granted in the event that the modification is not substantially completed by July 36th. But it goes on to say that notwithstanding, in the event that the applicant's been in communication with the zoning administrator, that the Jennifer Blanchet, as required, any delay beyond that date is due to third-party delays in weather. Things we can't control, not that we have just not been proceeding quickly. That the zoning administrator has the authority to extend the deadline coincident with the associated delay, but not to exceed the period granted by by the building commissioner. So we tried to build in some flexibility for ourselves. We have no objection to you eliminating that provision altogether, saying that you won't revoke the building permit, or you won't contemplate a circumstance where the building commissioner would revoke the building permit. But if for whatever reason we can't complete the installation by that date, that we would immediately appear on the board's next agenda, come before you and discuss them. Again, we're not going anywhere. But you know, we recognize that we're asking you to bless something that is not necessarily the norm, but that we think is sort of fair and equitable in light of the big picture. But again, I leave that.
I think there's another important element of schedule which hasn't been addressed, and that's there's a period of time in this schedule when the building will be without an emergency generator. Because you're taking the radiator off of the roof, you're not going to have a functioning generator. That's a significant safety issue. So I don't know if you've talked with building inspector about that, you've talked to the fire marshal about that, but to me, there needs to be a specific time frame in this schedule that says this is the downtime relative to the emergency generator.
I'll let Mr. Caswell address it because he don't.
You've changed.
I'm not changing. No, so when we built the actual Gantt chart, we built we were with them. So yeah, so the way we're trying to time this is we want all our prep work, everything done, all the piping, all the curb, all the roofing done. Then we're gonna shut the generator, relocate. And we're hoping for a day or two just to get that up and running. Then there's a commissioning by Mill. But I think the only thing is, I don't think it's not a life safety thing as far as I know. It's only just for backup in case their computer system goes. So it's not, this generator is not for life safety.
I get that, but I think we would want to put some kind of time frame on period of time when the building will be without.
It was built into our
I would think the bank would be interested.
Yeah, no, it's built into Gantt chart.
So what are you thinking worst case? If it be worst case?
Worst case could be a week based on.
And there is a life safety. But I think if you can identify a proposed time frame, I think we need to then float that with.
Meaning you'd like that somehow reflected on the schedule.
In the schedule, there needs to be, a time frame where if for some reason that gets significantly exceeded and the building is without its emergency generator for a longer period of time, then I think we need to talk.
We had a temp on there for a while.
So I think what I'm hearing is worst case scenario could be a week. It sounds like it's going to be more like 3 to 4 days. We would have no objection to the extent that the board wants to delve into this topic. It sounds like maybe something to do with a condition that would indicate that in the event that it is anticipated, or in the event that it is going to be more than 7 calendar days between the decommissioning or the shutting off of the existing radiator and the operational status of the relocated radiator, that approval of the building commissioner shall be required. We're not going to be able to get back in front of the board quickly enough for it to make any sense. Okay, we'll come back before you 2 weeks later. We just bought ourselves 3 weeks, right? So I don't think that it's in the bank's best interest either to delay that period of transition any longer than it needs to be. To the point that Mr. Caswell was making, it is a backup generator. So there are plenty of buildings and sites within the city that don't have backup generators. I appreciate that there may be a life safety component, but it's not. The reason, as I've understood it, in discussion with the bank, why it's absolutely critical that they have this sort of backup, because of the nature of the business they're in, obviously the number of employees and stuff that are within the building, their computer systems, safety and security more than anything else.
So I think you should suggest a time frame. I think we need sign off on that time frame from building officials, and should that time frame be affected one way or another, that the building officials have a chance to respond. And if you want to say it's 7 days, that's fine with me, whatever you want to propose. But I think we need that built into the schedule.
But I'll get 3 nods at 7 days if it needs.
I have a couple of comments. First, I do appreciate the letter that was sent by WSP. I understand what you were trying to say the other day about the physical structure and the fact that it was designed for this. And if you stretch it out, you have all kinds of other issues with the structure. But I think it was important to do that because we can't just have someone come and say we can't, right? So we have a record that we keep and that's in the record, and I appreciate that. I'm not sure I follow the analysis of the cost prohibitive nature, but that's not really our business. So I appreciate it, and it's for all of us to, to have it. So if someone comes and asks me why, I can say honestly what was evaluated by a professional, and that was the determination. As far as an emergency generator, it's actually the only requirement is you can't occupy the building if it's an emergency generator. It can be off for a week, but if you don't have another option, bring in a temp portable or whatever it is, everyone just has to get up, and that's not. I understood it was an optional standby. It doesn't have life safety components. Say again?
It's not for life safety.
Yeah. So in that case, they just don't have it.
It's for the main computer systems. They don't want to go down.
Yeah. So again, that would be a case where, say it was an emergency standby. As an owner, you're just obligated to do what you're supposed to do under the fire protection code. As far as the temporary occupancy permit, Rick, I was trying to follow your question. Was it that it didn't make sense, or?
I guess I was just thinking feasibly, were we gonna kick them out of the building if they didn't make it by July 30th? Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that when the Natick Mall opened, much fanfare, it was under a temporary occupancy.
Right, no, so that's what I'm saying. I'm fine with the temporary occupancy permit. I'm just, the language in there about us,
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
kicking him out, it seemed like.
Well, that's the effect.
Yeah, right.
That's the effect of it, right? So it's a notice, you have a standard, if you don't meet the standard, it's probably another intense discussion that would happen. I don't think it's automatic, but go ahead.
So I was gonna say, hey, it's a realistic concern, and we certainly understand that. One thing that may be helpful, I put that back in the applicant's court if you want to, but perhaps the applicant could give something to the board in writing clarifying, and this would be not only for the board, but also perhaps for the building commissioner and zoning enforcement officer, clarity that there is agreement from the applicant that timeline is, that term is enforceable, maybe back to your question, that this is not going to be something to dispute at a later point. So even though there might be whatever other provisions are incorporated in there, there isn't any dispute or debate between the building commissioner, the zoning administrator, and the applicant and the IFS as to that timeline. Should that timeline be reached, and there's a debate about it, that might be helpful, I think, here, only because the board can be clear enough about that in the decision. If the current decision doesn't accommodate the interim, condition of non-compliance with things being retrofitted, but this revision would do it. But I think having perhaps the applicant speak to that directly might be helpful here to provide some comment to the board if that's the issues.
And through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to do that and to go on the record and saying that, again, there was communication between my office, I think it was my partner, Lisa Mead, and Andy Ford. We went through, I don't know so much this kind of opportunity to adjust it, maybe we did, but there was some back and forth, I think, between Lisa and Andy.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify too, the original intention here was mainly to bring up this question because it was quite obvious, you're putting aside the IFS entirely, just the discussion that we've had and seen the entire course of this. We knew, of course, the bank might be looking for occupancy earlier based on the schedule as we were hearing it. So it seemed logical that both the applicant be prepared to speak obviously to what they're interested in that respect, but also that the board members be prepared so that wherever you land on this, because the zoning administrator and the building commissioner don't have that flexibility on the permit right now, given the unusual, and awkward situation, unfortunately for everybody, Frank, and it's somewhat unfortunate as well for the bank, in terms of this equipment, arriving the way it is and being installed this way. If there is a desire and a willingness to, allow some latitude there for occupancy and not have months on end that the building is also just not being utilized in any good capacity, recognizing that, mistakes may have been made. It seemed to be that if board members were prepared to craft or be specific about what you wanted there, we can help to revise the language, but mainly that the framework there of what do you want to, to include or not include, what will be okay, what will be okay. If you don't want to do that, that's perfectly fine too, but it seemed reasonable in the context here to bring it up such that you could craft something if you're approving this clarify for the building commissioner, the zoning administrator, so that they're not in the unfortunate situation of, well, it's maybe months on end, you can't have an occupancy. If there's a willingness to have some flexibility there, you could codify that clearly enough for the zoning administrator and the building commissioner.
I mean, just to be clear, I like the idea of the temporary occupancy.
Yeah.
I just don't, this language is just so convoluted that it seems to be saying much more than we need to say.
Yeah, well, quite frankly, I don't frankly think we would use that as our final language.
Okay.
Yeah, just to be clear, frankly, my concern here was mainly that I thought it'd be beneficial for the board to discuss what terms would be reasonable. My thinking was that once the board had had a discussion about that, because, the bank has to present its side, but then the board has to decide, well, maybe it makes sense at the end of the day. It seemed to me that the board should discuss what it wants, and then the office could essentially, we're just pointing out a couple of things you might consider, really. I think the idea here is that we would craft that language more specifically and tighter, probably to, it was not intended to be the final language in any way, mainly to say, these are some things you might want to consider in this. We're happy to craft something, but we also didn't want to craft something that's totally off course. So, it might be better for you to inform, for us, when you think of parameters, we can then draft something accordingly. That seemed to be, I think, more what we were thinking than just working with that. It was more about what timelines seem reasonable, what kind of check-ins seem, reasonable, that sort of thing.
But I guess my observation would be that if the building's inhabitable, there's no risk to humans, it's aesthetics.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good vehicle, and I'm agreeing with you in that it can be pretty clean. We talked about, we'll have a set of plans that'll say this is what's going to happen. I don't know that we need to know the details of each step of it. Maybe that's a report, but at the end of the day, there's a tape measure that says, yeah, it's the right height, and it worked out.
Yeah. I think, what would be, I don't know whether we've ever done this type of thing before, but what would make sense to me would be to say, as it says here, recognize that we're aiming for completion by July 30th. And maybe if there's an issue that comes up that prevents that from happening, maybe, having a report to us that says, here's what's going on, and, do we need to do anything about
We
that?
extend it.
Yeah. Rather than all these other steps about, rescinding the permit.
Makes sense.
So meaning returning to the board with sufficient time to try to address that, as we're approaching that timeline, right? The bank is approaching that timeline.
Because I think that you'll know how it's going, right? And you'll get to that point, and we're picking, it's not an arbitrary date, but it's a date. And then it wouldn't be unreasonably withheld. We wouldn't say, oh, midnight on July, whatever.
Yeah,
We would,
by June 30th that something's going on.
yeah, we'll just say, okay, it's a month or.
I have two requests relative to the drawing. Please, very quick. But the drawings identify a top of new parapet elevation, 28 feet above the level 1 floor slab. I'd like you to just put a dimension, an elevation notation on the actual radiator. Relative to that, I know you've got the dimension above the roof and above the existing parapet. It would be good to have just an elevation designation for the top of the radiator, similar to what you have for the parapet.
Okay.
And I also, given that you're showing that it's roughly the same height as the other equipment on the new addition, could you also identify the elevation of the top of that equipment on the roof, just so we understand that? And then one last request, and you mentioned this, but I'm wondering if you could somehow designate this on the drawings. You said at the last meeting that we don't need to see interior routing of piping and connections to the new radiator location. It would be good to just understand and confirm that none of that is visible on top of the roof on the outside. May all be happening within that new stucco screen wall, but I think you just need to somehow acknowledge that.
Okay, a note on the plan, is that sufficient? Okay.
I think a couple of columns in the plan could help with that and make it
An
clear.
acknowledgement on the plans that any exposed connections to the radiator will happen within this group. See it.
I have a very basic question, hopefully it's easy, but I think that this conceptually is the best solution last time we came, and I think the dimensions prove that. It's all dimensioned well to what it is going to be now. But the one missing dimension that I was trying to find, and this might only be for the meeting minutes, but approximately how much is this thing dropping? I could, because the dimension to the existing roof was not provided in the drawings. So I'm just curious, the kind of the punchline, roughly how much are we dropping this piece of equipment from its current location to this new location?
In terms of the height from the ground today versus.
Yeah, I think your architect might probably knows.
Can you go back to that?
Yeah, which one? This one?
Anyone with a dimension, if you zoom in to the dimensions, yeah, there. So essentially, we're dropping it just about the same dimension there. You see 6'4" in 3/4.
Oh, because it lines up. Okay.
The parapets in the two buildings are roughly the same, and so it's just dropping that distance. So it's about 6 feet. I would say teal day, 6 feet, around.
Just kind of wanted to know for the record what we were doing this all. So thank you.
Here's the other question I had. You mentioned in the presentation, this is the elevation as we're, side view. What do you estimate it is from line of sight from the ground? Like if I walked over there, how much do you think ballpark I would see it with the parapet and the offsets?
Go back to the board. In terms of how much is the exposure?
How much is, like now we look at it and everyone sees it, but it's going to be an improvement significantly, but the question is.
That's what these renderings. It's difficult to estimate that actually. I'm not sure what you're asking.
As I'm standing in the new location, you're going to put the radio in the new location, I'm across the street.
Yeah.
And I look directly up at it, line of sight. How much exposure am I going to see?
This much. That's standing on the other side of the property. You're seeing the actual piece of equipment right where the hopping just above. I think it's a hard question to answer because it depends upon what you're getting from it.
Well, with all your tools, you can span it, right? But I appreciate it. That's what I was asking.
We're seeing mostly the storage tank, which is probably in this particular spot, in this particular direction. I bet we're seeing 12 to 10 inches of the actual box. And then the storage tank, just another 10 or 12 inches on top.
So on the left, are we seeing
That's another piece of equipment that's on the.
That's a parapet wall on the new building? And then this is the stucco enclosure? We're seeing here. And your elevations show those at the top of those walls are at the same elevation.
You're talking about, that's the surround for
It's setting quite a bit back.
Yeah, just.
It doesn't look like they're at the same elevation.
Right there.
Meeting right here.
There is where they're coming with the.
This is where it's meeting it.
Okay.
It's a right.
So return.
That trio.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions before we open it up to the public?
The only other question is the access to the parapet. Is there a door, or do you just jump over with a
Door access.
Well, so you can get in.
Then
Shuffle.
there'll be a door access into the enclosure. It's in the drawings. It's on the far garden side where we're trying to make sure you don't see. And the door would be finished similarly to the screen.
Say that again.
Can you go to the roof plan, please? Far bottom left here, we're showing an access door into the screen.
Oh, there it is.
And we're pushing it as far back onto Garden Street as possible to not be seen from Prospect or Straits. See, it would be finished the same, but you're still going to see a frame.
Yep.
Of something.
And your screen wall is lifted.
About 18 inches, 24 inches off.
It's lifted off the roof, so you've got drainage underneath.
Yeah, we're not affecting drainage.
I'll be. Okay, any other questions? I'd like to open it up to public comment if there are any.
In favor?
You have. Any comment? We will close public comment. Take it back and talk about next step. I think there are a couple of loose ends to address that we talked about in the drawings. We need to talk about a document that constitutes the acceptance of this.
Yeah, it sounds like this, we're gonna have to craft something, I think, between now and another meeting, because I don't think it's something that can be developed on the fly based on we. I think taking, unless there's further input from the board, which could be helpful depending on where, if there's some further thoughts, we can work to craft something, for prior to the next meeting, I think. We'd like to check with the chair, of course, on that, but just to draft something for the board's consideration for the next meeting, it's a bit more specific to the comment that Rick made. If you have any other further thoughts about what makes sense here, that'll make it much cleaner and helpful for us for, crafting something, but to be as specific as possible as we can based on the discussion tonight about the timeline, the commitments and so forth. Coming back, as I understand it, coming back to the board if there's a need as you're approaching that deadline, as opposed to, an extension from the zoning administrator, it'd be coming back to the board and asking to clarify if there's a delay or an issue coming up in advance of that, such that the board could, extend if need be or address it in some way after hearing from the bank that they run into an issue. I guess that's my understanding of where we were tracking your discussion earlier. Was a statement.
Kind of work on meantime.
Yeah, that's it. So the comment was, and it's going to be my comment as well. We were hopeful to leave with a vote tonight, and I appreciate that there are a few loose ends in terms of the final plan. We can make those plan adjustments. Certainly, there's going to be conditions of approval. The issue is if we're back here in 2 weeks, and we'll be back here in 2 weeks, and it's not until then that we receive a vote, take that time frame we provided and move up everything 2 more weeks, right? Because I don't think that the bank is going to be inclined to incur this significant cost of ordering the curb without having a decision that's been issued.
If I could, to the extent it's helpful for the board, I guess. We sometimes have this debate about how specific we need to be with the verbiage when we leave the board meeting and so forth versus, I realize there's always the pros and cons and that sort of thing. I'm not as concerned about the precise verbiage. I think we can work that out, work with the chair for a decision. I do think it's important that the salient thresholds or parameters for that are clear tonight. So if the board is inclined to issue a decision and clarify what it wants, I'm not as worried that that can't be memorialized in the decision that is decided by the board chair. But I do think, what in there in your, what you're asking us.
So I think that we've been pretty clear about what we hope to get out in terms of some of the things that Bob has itemized. And in the past, we have, not the recent past, but several years ago, we had a practice of voting and then coming back to the board for approval of the decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we could do. We could actually take a vote to approve, take a vote tonight, and leave the actual approval of the wording of the decision to our next meeting.
I would say yes and no, only just in that procedurally, technically, you're not, I guess I would say in characterizing wise, you're not necessarily approving anything because it's the approval itself is going to be conditional. So to me, it sounds more like in essence, you're really still holding off that approval to the next meeting because the conditions are actually salient to and important to the approval you're granting. So I don't know if we could say that that's an approval and then an approval of the written conditions. It's more, it's sort of a verbal preemptive sort of explanation of what the written decision will be.
It seems like most of what we want is clarification on the plans of dimension. That's
I think so.
Clarifying documents.
I feel like we can narrow this down quickly.
Yeah.
And then just do the vote tonight. I think we can come up with a solution this evening and then just a little bit of language is necessary from what I'm hearing. And relative to the temporary occupancy, right?
I mean, ultimately, there's an amendment to the original agreement.
Right.
That's the document that we're talking about. The solution that is being proposed, I think we all understand now, we understand the details, we ask for a couple more dimensions, but in concept, the solution that's being proposed is what we have been talking about.
Right.
Well, what if it were? I don't want to leave something, I don't want to light something. I don't want to be.
That's risky.
So I think that if we, maybe what we could do is we could vote to approve and leave it up to the chair and the planning director to write the final language of and the language will include required submission of plans. It isn't changing what we're approving. It's just changing the documentation.
Based on the parameters discussed tonight, it would include the timeframe component. It would require the submission of subsequent plans that show those dimensions prior to the building work being done, right? This, that's part of that. And then if there's anything else.
Yeah. Because they're going to be going ahead, assuming that there's no appeals or anything like that. So, they're taking a very small leap.
I'm more than happy to work with the chair, as otherwise, it's as long as you're clear about the substantive components of it, I think that's the more important than the verbiage. I think we can, that's clear enough for me to work out.
There's really
And
nothing.
I guess my only comment would be, we're here because we're here and we can accommodate, but I'm not sure that ordering a long lead time item that you're not paying for, you're ordering. Right? You have a say in it too, I guess is the way I would put it to the applicant. Right? It's not a condition we created, but if you have one lead time item, you could consider taking action on it. That's right. That's some separate and out of our control, because I'm a little leery of doing something on the fly and then regretting it, or missing something and not having it that could be appealed. Right? Is my sense. I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
I've seen it done before. We vote based on what we said, this is it. But again, that's both sides have actions to take. The applicant can take an action and we can take an action.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I certainly appreciate that, right? It's all a question of the degree of risk, right? So I appreciate that. I'm also not one, and I've been before your board a few times before, I'm not one to push in most instances for any sort of prompt action. What's another couple weeks in the context of a subdivision application or a special permit application? Typically not much. And I counsel boards as well, and I typically tell boards in most instances it's best to have a written decision for you, as you know. So in the circumstance where this is not a new special permit, it's not a new special plan approval, it's an amendment of a comprehensive special permit issued quite some time ago. And there are very limited conditions of approval that have been discussed. It's 3, maybe 4 tweaks to the plan. Those sort of plan tweaks are consistently included as conditions of approval that make these plan tweaks, submit them to the planning staff, and be sure that they incorporate permits. And then it really sounds to me like the only unusual, irregular condition that you're contemplating is this condition concerning the issuance of a temporary CO. I'm generally comfortable with what Mr. Ford drafted. It sounds like maybe the board doesn't think it needs to be quite that complex. I think it'd be simple to draft 2 or 3 sentences that essentially say the applicant's going to comply more or less with the timeline that's been submitted. If the applicant anticipates it cannot comply with the aforesaid timeline, the applicant shall submit a request to appear before the board to provide an updated request additional time, which the board shall not withhold, unreasonably withhold or delay.
You get that?
Yeah, I say that probably, that's
Can we
more,
agree with that?
thinking makes the tracking makes sense. That the zoning administrator might give an extension. I think what I've heard here, I think sort of consistently is, the applicant can come back to the board if there's an issue in advance of that approaching timeframe to resolve, rather than having this part of the probably the cover level everybody wants to. Isn't something happening offline from the planning board? It's certainly back to the spot. So that can be addressed.
And from a timeliness perspective, we would obviously prefer to just go to the zoning administrator. It's quicker for us. But if the board's uncomfortable with that, if you'd rather see us and have us come before you, we'll come before you. The hope is that we're not going to have to.
Can we make a motion to grant approval as outlined verbally? Is that possible? Addressing those 3.
Yeah, I would say, as discussed here this evening, the only things that I think it might be helpful for my, and I think it would be, I do think it's worth just restating here, the dimensions or the adjustments you want on the plans that are coming back, just to be everybody's
So
clear.
that they're in the
Yeah,
And I'm happy to recite what I have.
just want to make sure everybody's clear here, and, you know, that'll make it easier also for the architect, everybody else is doing plans, and only one thing comes back, so.
And to clarify, to that question, I don't think you have to come back to us every time there's an event.
Yeah.
The zoning administrator is well capable of enforcement of
Right, in
all
between,
things, you know,
yes.
it's not.
We talked about dimensions, we talked about routing of piping and connections, and we talked about the added line item in the schedule relative to shutdown.
Correct. And for dimensions, I had dimensions of, add an elevation to, as a notation with respect to the radiator in terms of its height, from the top of the new parapet. And then same with respect to the other equipment that was shown, existing equipment shown on the plan.
Not relative to the top of the new parapet, but an elevation like you noted for the top of the parapet, which references the ground floor slab. So you've got one point of reference for all of those elevations. So with that.
So
No.
Second.
Show of hands. Those in favor. Opposed. So in concept. We have.
Okay.
And we'll work on the language.
Yeah. We appreciate the cooperation.
Thank you. That was an example. It was like we could look at it.
is there,
I mean, I get it to some degree, we have to know.
Yeah.
It's big, yeah.
So I'm.
You think that you
It's just.
You keep hearing the same thing. In this case, I feel a little less obligated. If you were to saw the video.
or maybe not,
We
maybe.
have to do this. You know, some other guys.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's move on to general business. We've got a couple of items. One is Perry Way release of covenant, which just came up.
We just say what would check.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, folks, this is, the chair and I, we had to add something to the agenda here that was, it's a long story, but it wasn't able to be captured here earlier because of, snafu. At any rate, this is really a housekeeping item, but, this happens periodically when folks are doing closings on properties. They sometimes find conditions or things that weren't closed off for whatever reason by prior parties. In this particular instance, what I'm just, sorry, let me just make sure. Watching and
I was gonna say, there was an attendee.
Yeah, we do have an attendee. So the street we're talking about is Perry Way. And so off of Low Street, this is an older subdivision roadway in the business park, right? It goes all the way down in there, and technically, actually, at the end of the street is our Department of Public Services facility right here. At any rate, the requests that come in, this happens not infrequently. Someone finds, a closing attorney might find that there's an old covenant or restriction or something like that, a Conservation Commission order of conditions that wasn't released. And it was discovered here that for whatever reason, it's not obvious to us in the file whether there's be any reason for holding up the release now. But some lots were released from the roadway construction, making this all adequate, and some were not. It's not clear looking through the records, is any rationale for withholding anything different now. It's something probably housekeeping that should have been taken care of previously, but it does happen. Not like I said, not infrequently on older subdivisions. So here, what the office is recommending, and this was brought up by the attorneys work for the property owners. The quick summary, this is actually the older subdivision plan we had for the lots. Very basic plan.
What time period are we talking about here?
This was 90, was it 80 or 90?
88 was the last release.
87.
It's during the Adams administration.
At any rate, and I apologize again, we just didn't, this is one of those things where what happens is folks are trying to light up the transactions and there's really no good case in this instance. I think the process up here for something minor like this, but in essence, we couldn't foresee this being in the agenda. It sometimes happens. The idea being, all you're doing is to do something you did previously. This is just an updated certificate. It's supplementing one that was previously issued by the board, which I can show as well, where the board released other lots on the roadway from this covenant, but didn't release, this sub lots in particular these folks own. So clearly, that subdivision roadway has been complete for a long time. The Department of Public Services is dealing with the maintenance of the roadway. They have specifically different streets. So anyway, to make it easier for everybody down the road, what I've suggested here, if the board votes to approve the release of lots and to authorize the chair to sign, this certificate can be taken to the registry of deeds, and we've listed off every lot on the roadway. So there isn't any ambiguity going forward for anybody. It wouldn't be just the folks who are asking for this, lot right here. We want to make sure there's no ambiguity. So I just listed off every lot that was created on that subdivision off of the roadway. None of them are held that there's a question about the completion of the roadway. This roadway obviously goes back to quite a while. Unless you have any questions, to me, this is more of a housekeeping thing, closing records, allowing folks to do another transaction, real estate that doesn't need to be held up, in my opinion. So didn't seem logical to postpone this.
I have to tell you, we encountered this numerous times with real estate closings, and I always thought, should there be some sort of statute of limitations here? Can we enforce this as a local planning board? Like after 10 years, shame on the city for not going around and checking these things versus us having to come back, so many times. And sometimes it was very expensive to get a surveyor to do something.
The order conditions for conservation, it comes up, I would say, even more frequently.
The worst.
Yeah.
I know that's a different department.
And I've seen both sides of it. I mean, frankly, the wetlands permitting process is extremely unnecessarily complicated. The bureaucracy and the paperwork involved, the way that it's done. Unfortunately, it's done both with a regional filing and a local filing, and it's a whole sort of.
I think it's backwards.
It's a little bit, but at any rate, that happens a lot with the order conditions. I can't, unfortunately, there's no good answer to that one because I haven't seen, depending on continuity of time or in communities, decades, whoever was here, who was enforcing it, how many staff people there to follow up on all the conditions of approval. I can't speak to all that. I can only talk, when I'm here or when I'm here, but.
I like the idea though, just wiping out all the lots.
Yeah, again, unless there's some unique reason, it wasn't obvious to me looking through the record why only those lots, and whether it was a scrivener's error or missing, so I don't know, but it wasn't like it was something obvious there saying, there's a reason we held off on these lots.
Was it all but a couple, or was it half, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear to me why these, there's actually, it's only like 3 of these number of lots that are actually affected here.
Okay, so it's a small number or omitted actually.
Yeah, again, I just didn't want there to be ambiguity by listing them off. Even this is actually reiterating some of the lots that were released previously, but I didn't want there to be any ambiguity on this one.
But for some reason, everything, looking at that 1988 release, everything above 11 wasn't complete. So 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17.
Just stopped it.
It just stopped it.
Yeah.
So why almost? I mean, did they build the road to the extent that, was it supposed to go further and they didn't?
No, I mean, it's basically ostensibly the same, but it's not any.
Because there aren't 18 lots on the street.
No, it's a weird sort of combination. Like if you look at the old plan, there's like down at the end there that, the lots are combined here for the use of the development. And there's this is a drainage easement, on the lots that we're seeing, so it's not actually a separate lot.
So probably what happened is 7 and 8 got merged.
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
And 8 was never. Okay,
Yeah. Again, it's if I had seen something that was like a flag in there saying like there's a reason why this, and we wouldn't want to do it now, but there was nothing in there. This is clearly just sort of an old trailing end that happened.
Right.
Sometimes just no one cleared up the paperwork years ago, and now somebody's filled up with it.
They only went partway. They stopped halfway down the street.
Yeah. I don't know how the construction at the time, who was signing off. I don't know who's doing inspect. I can't.
What is the motion? Is the motion to?
Sorry, the motion would be to the release of the lots and the chair to sign the certificate.
So.
Could I have a motion?
Motion to release all covenants throughout the state.
Massachusetts. You made something to show that.
Yeah, that sounds good. And if you don't mind, maybe we can.
On to approval of minutes, for all 4 of these, I sent Caitlin my comments. We did too. I don't know if anybody else sent comments, but I think the notes now are in a position to be approved. Unless anyone has any other comments about it, I'd like a motion related to.
I think that, well, you were not.
I was not there for two of
We have to
those.
do them one of the.
Yeah, I can't vote on all.
Where have you been?
I did send in one comment on the February 4th.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of December 17, 2025.
All those in favor?
Make a motion,
Opposed? Abstentions?
Jack said yes too.
make a motion to approve the minutes of January 7th, 2026.
Second.
All those in favor?
I think I was, I think I'm sorry, abstain.
One abstention?
Two.
Two
Abstain.
I'll just leave my hand up.
Okay,
And move approval of the minutes of February 4th, 2026.
Amended.
That's amended. Second.
Amended.
all those in favor?
I wasn't
Abstention?
abstention.
One abstention.
And, oh, why don't you do this?
I remember the date. I closed my.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of February. I'm trying to give you help.
18.
Second.
Second, all those in favor?
Abstain.
Abstain.
Two abstentions. All right, okay, clearly. Any other updates from the chair? I have no other.
Maybe you were anxious to get out of here. Just two updates I would offer. One is, we had a working session with the consultant with the Story Avenue stuff. He was gonna get back to me this weekend. He was delayed a little bit, got back to me. I was very busy today, so I didn't have a chance to follow up on that and push something out. So I'm gonna do that tomorrow morning with the subgroup. But one of the things that when he came back, and he was generally speaking in agreement on the scope, I had tweaked two prior versions that I had on this, merged them together, made some tweaks based on our discussion, sent it over to him. This is David Gamble. And he sent back on a quick glance when I saw from him, and I wasn't able to follow up on this because I've been busy today with a lot of other things, but he was essentially suggesting he sort of agreed with the general scope and the approach that we were talking about in our subgroup. I know some of you weren't part of that discussion, so I apologize if you have any questions about it generally. The idea here is how do we want to run our process for the sort of, visioning of this and that, and the deliverables and sort of the approach of the public meetings and whatnot and the working group sessions. And so the main thing that I got, just a quick glance at his emails, I was doing other stuff today on this, was I think, and this is partly, I wanted, if you have any input on this now, it might be helpful. It might be something for the subgroup as we go into the tomorrow to follow up on. But he was suggesting that because of the budget, the scope of work, and the comments and the group's comments or thoughts about what we want to cover in that ground, he felt that it would be more realistic to cover a smaller area. Essentially, from my lens of that might mean something more on the lines of like this side of, what we're talking about here as opposed to over here. He wasn't very specific about how much of an area, but he felt it was a larger area based on the sort of variety of different thoughts the subgroup had about how much ground we want to cover, what we want to do. All that being said, I am not I wouldn't be as concerned about that front myself, and with a couple of caveats maybe. One is we've already kind of talked at one point about to what degree we want to incorporate this piece right here. I do think it's beneficial for a visioning exercise and what we want as a city, but we also know it's under state control. We're not necessarily prioritizing housing units. It sounds like based on the water supply impacts and all that kind of stuff. We have to reserve the unit count, I think, for city zoning properties and whatnot. This is state land under Mass DOT right now. But the other thing is I happen to look at this area and I happen to think that the low hanging fruit of easier pieces to work with and the things that are more likely to happen in the near term are these larger chunks and probably this section here. So from my lens, because I think these are going to be harder to work with and aren't going to change much, and these are probably not going to change, substantially in terms of just being multi-family housing that are sort of isolated, if you will, as condos. They're all condos. They're not even, one by one developed. To me, it's not, if we're going to focus on something more specifically, this is actually where I think the most of our benefit comes out of anyway. So I'm perfectly fine with that sort of approach and saying, all right, if we're going to focus on this, we're going to, let's do that. So I would be fine with sort of making an adjustment with him on that front there, but I don't know whether now or going to tomorrow, the subgroup anyway. getting thoughts on that piece. I have to get it from the others who were part of our discussion as well on the council side. But that was kind of the tip that I got from him in the response back to the scope as well. The group wants to do, a lot here, but wants to do a larger area that maybe I think is sort of realistic on this, perhaps doing a smaller area. And that's what my thinking runs based on that. Just in,
When you say larger area, are you talking about a site plan vision?
yeah, so the sort of master plan block diagram, by the way, and I apologize, he actually said with his email, and again, I was only able to take a look at this right before the meeting because I was occupied with a bunch of other things today, but he had sent over, this is an example, for instance, of another example he thought was sort of comparable to the types of, again, this is a little bit more of an aerial view, but an example from another project, of how we could help to sort of visualize what that might look like down the road for the area. Again, as long as it's helping to define the blocks we talked about and it's creating the building forms and providing some sense of what that's going to feel like, I would be I'd much rather do, without having a discussion with the city council about appropriating more funds and that, multiple consultants have said, look, you only get so much money to work with here. I would prefer to get like something really good for that area that's the low hanging fruit and much more likely to happen in bigger chunks, that sort of thing. In the Port Plaza and the Market Basket and the Low Street area that Mingo is looking at, where that stuff is more likely to happen in a couple of decades, and make meaningful chunk of changes. I don't think that means we don't look at the other areas, but it might mean that the consultant's spending a little bit less time and focus on those pieces of it.
To me, there's two types of documentation that would come out of this. One is a zoning map, right? Which is very simple and
Right.
could cover all of that area that you're talking.
Agreed.
Because it's just a land use.
Agreed. And some of that would be informed in some ways more by us than.
So if that's one thing, and the zoning language relates to all of that, the vision itself could be much more
Just smaller.
greater in terms of the core project.
That's what I was thinking here, to sort of balance out the, concerns here, again, I don't think when I went for the grant originally, I don't think we could go higher than 50,000. So it wasn't like, again, I would love to have $100,000, to do a bigger project, but we weren't.
You could apply this year or 2 years from now for another 50.
Exactly.
And then something,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we go after grants whenever we can.
Yeah.
Something that seems within reason, it's gonna help us, I think in this case, we could have asked for more, so, but at any rate, that's kind of what, his suggestion was we pick a smaller area. I happen to think that the priority is probably for us is putting the bigger bang for our buck is probably over here. And these pieces are, quite frankly, I think from a real estate perspective, are gonna be hard to really get to be reconfigured for a number of reasons, including, gas station off of I-95, that's not gonna, so I'm not as concerned about that piece of it and sort of saying, all right, for now, our master plan is sort of incorporating some of that and maybe tweaking it as we're going a little bit. But for the most part, what he's working on with us is the block network in here, the buildings and massing and how that's going to look like, as opposed to trying to reconfigure everything that's in here into one, massing all these smaller lots together, assuming someone's going to redevelop that. He's basically saying that's something that's spreading some of the work here, a little bit too thin for us to do, and I frankly don't think it's going to stand out quite as easily.
I just have one thought. It's probably more of a political comment than a legal or planning comment, but doing this area gives you the cover that there's a lot of landowners in there. It's a big area. You can create a vision. Yes, it'll take decades to happen. If you pare down the smaller area, which I agree is the area we all think the most potential is, there's no disagreement there.
Yeah.
But you're now living in an area where there's one landowner that probably controls 75 to 80% of it. So it's like a different kind of political conversation than the bigger areas. So I just think that needs to be thought about.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Actually, maybe I could clarify what I'm thinking here, and I think it might go to something Bob said. I don't think we necessarily walk away from our visioning and rezoning of the area, but perhaps it's really what we're saying here is the consultant is only helping us with the sort of visualization tools to illustrate better that block of this area.
That's why it's more political, because the perception is going to be you're just rezoning Port Plaza.
Right. Well, and I think at least I would say that is we're focusing on what's going to be most likely to be beneficial to us.
And there's no disagreement on that. It's just that that's why I say it's a complicated political question that I'm not qualified to even to answer, but I think it's complicated.
Yeah.
I think there's a middle ground, which is that we look at both sides of Low Street. Because there are things happening that could happen on both sides of Low Street.
So you think about
corridor.
One parcel.
And I'm thinking also about the Story Avenue. We need to think about how to make Story Avenue more walkable, bikeable, whatever. But one half of it is cemeteries. So,
And don't forget.
So that's some more savvy politician there. So that's the proof, right?
So we're looking around.
Everybody know.
Yeah. So looking around the perimeter, in addition to that massive thing.
Yeah. There you go.
There's
You just
a-
thread the needle.
Another thing, just, I worked on a project after the visioning had happened. And it was just one large shopping center that had been done, and had been done in cooperation with the shopping center owner.
This is Durham.
Durham, yeah. And
That's what came to my mind.
yeah, and so the residents really bought into that vision.
Yeah.
But the ultimate developer didn't.
Do you, in your thinking here, was Market Basket included or not included? You were saying focus on this area as opposed to?
No, I'm thinking about that block, the super block.
Okay.
It goes from Low Street to Market Basket.
Okay.
But also, as part of the visioning, look at how you see it and how you experience it from Low Street and Story Avenue. So
Yes.
not just internal, but you're looking.
Oh, yes, sorry, 100%, I agree. I mean, I do think if we're looking at this block here, I think even if we have to accept it for, some period of time, there's smaller pieces are harder to work with, right? But I think that streetscape has to be important, right? And I also agree down here in the Low Street section, like, I wouldn't want to do just Port Plaza and Market Basket, but not do this Low Street section here. That would be a mistake. We have this building that's presumably coming along here. We should frame and deal with this part of it, right?
I think we can think about that, Plaza Landings as the new context for what happens to
Right,
Pennyworths, for example.
right. We would like that to be integrated with what happens here. As part of it.
So out of curiosity, I appreciate the Coney Island image that he provided us. But sub area B, is that even sub area B, is that even a potential residential? And if so, should we take that into consideration?
Yeah, I mean, I should clarify here, it's partly, my own fault for that there's been, sub area B has been included here, but going back a couple of years at this point, we saw the vacancy of that property, not being utilized very much, and I wouldn't suggest necessarily we take away the transit component, but I think that we could possibly, as a Commonwealth and city, get more out of that property than just the vacant parking. I feel like it's a missed opportunity there. However, it's under Mass DOT's jurisdiction. So,
Okay.
And in several years of discussions with a few folks here and there, has not gone through any of that, and partly because it was funded partly with federal funds. So, imagine how difficult it is for us to undo can we move it from Mass DOT over to those who can make housing out of it, or that's going to take some time. So,
But there's been a big push for housing.
there has.
And I have to say that to me is the most ideal place.
But there's also a push for transportation too.
Yeah. Again, I don't think we drop it off the radar, but one of the other things that I at least have on my list is there is now this finite cap of water we can provide. And what I'm seeing here on the whole lens, generally speaking, is given the limitations that we have, just in quick summary, the amount of water we can provide for unit counts that are happening in different areas like MBTA communities, put it a placeholder for Waterfront West, if it happens, what kind of units are there. You have ADUs that are happening. If people are going to have a combination with that, we got intermunicipal agreements with across the line. Just in quick synopsis, going back to something I might have mentioned previously, my concern here is that we would be trying to put units here, assuming that we're then taking away from units that could be used here to reform this area and benefit it as a, redeveloped village center. So in some ways, I'd even be reticent to, now that I know about the water supply limits sort of colliding here with this, like how much we can really do, we can't create 1,000 units of residential here because we couldn't provide the water for it. So.
But what I was thinking, again, I'm trying to get in the middle there.
Yeah.
Thinking about Bob's thought about a zoning map and thinking about Coney Island. We could have a massing and circulation plan for that without assigning a use to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we could say, this is the kind of buildings we want. We want to make a connection to the Garrison Trail,
right? That
kind of thing. You use that signalized intersection.
Right.
So we could actually have a master plan that doesn't designate any use for.
Yes.
And that doesn't need to have the level of detail.
Agreed. I agree. And I agree. That's sort of perhaps what we're doing here is we're saying like there's portions of this that we're covering with our zoning and our component here that are larger than the consultant is doing to help us visualize the graphics. Yes. Because that's only what we can do with our budget, right? And then so I think that can work here for us.
He could do he could do a detailed, modeling of something in the supermarket along those streets.
That's more generic.
And then a kind of a wireframe, whatever.
Yeah.
For the area B.
Agreed, 100%. And I think, that is doable. And what he's essentially saying, I guess, is, that's doable, but the refined detailing for everything in that entire area, like, this won't be doable for him for the entire area. He's saying that.
Or desirable. That's too specific.
Well, yeah.
Right there for the boats.
Norwalk, yeah, so Norwalk, and this was the color version.
That's too specific.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's more specific.
I don't like schools.
Science standard.
Count stories.
Okay, so I'll follow up tomorrow, and let's give, I'll push that back from the consultant back. He had sent some comments to me on the scope. I'll push that out to the group. Again, if you have further thoughts, especially since there are some of the council aren't here to with us. For thoughts that folks have on this, appreciate your thoughts tonight. I think if the others are sort of on the same general page about that, then we can get going in that piece of that with him, and parallel it with our work, for the larger area. That you won't necessarily providing detailed graphics for, but we'll still supplement that. So,
We're gonna meet tomorrow.
I don't think so at this point, just based on, because I have to touch base with him and I wasn't able to close it loop today. But there is also a mention on April 15th, we're tentatively going to have another joint public hearing on zoning amendment. So Councilor Nikitic, who was here tonight, had submitted for the last council packet a zoning amendment. The quick mention of this is just that it has to do a little bit with the McMansionization of, homes and small lots and housing. It's a bit of touch on that. It's a text amendment, but it goes with something that I think might also be coming forward in the council for some zoning changes or possible zoning changes for the western and, the city, the sort of suburban sprawl neighborhoods. That might do some things that make sense from a zoning perspective, because we're sort of saying, does the superimposed zoning that's there today make sense, right? Suburban sprawl zoning. Should we, we've seen some of that with 18 Island, for instance. So I think we're talking with counselors in the coming days about some of those pieces and how that all fits together and what's going to be included in that's a better idea. But I think there's a possibility, I guess the reason I mentioned that is there's a possibility that one amendment that's already been brought forward, it's text, that you pushed out like we usually do. Here's a joint public hearing, here's materials, it's on our regular agenda. But we'll probably also have another amendment or two related to that in some way, dealing with dimension requirements or some of those neighborhood, zoning constraints in the western, neighborhoods, let's say. Perhaps I can't speak specifically to those because we haven't gotten to some of the specifics of what those amendments might include that the councilors are thinking of there. But it definitely seems like it's in the same sort of realm of how do we change the zoning to create better, more consistent neighborhoods in terms of the character of them, and but also try to preserve affordable housing and smaller units where possible, as opposed to everything becoming a larger unit. So that's all I can sort of offer at this point until I get a little more detail. But I think on the April 15th meeting, we'll probably have a couple of amendments. At least one will certainly. It sounds like maybe a couple more dealing with some of that stuff. So if you're thinking about what the zoning says for the R1 lots, R2 lots, and what you think makes sense or doesn't. I saw a couple of years back, there's twice that we approached with the city council chamber, the subject of right sizing lots or, changing the dimensional requirements, front setback not being absurdly set back in the street, but bringing up maybe more traditionally. Things like that. We were met with some opposition of the council chamber, but we also heard it another time when we were doing our master plan update. Essentially from, folks in the country, I think it was more sort of public comment I was hearing, but we weren't getting support essentially the council chamber, and we weren't getting any sponsorship for changes that would have done that. But we now have some interest, and it's good for us to look at that again, one way or the other, regardless of where you all land. But so I think it's good we're looking at that. But I mentioned it mainly because it's as we're looking at this piece here, we can look at prior examples, but I think this focus now seems to be more on the western end of the city, if you will. I don't mean on the other side of I-95. I mean, it's right from, from this Story Avenue area, kind of over west, as opposed to tight in the National Register Historic District area. The reason I mentioned that, I don't know until we get into our detailed discussion, but there was actually a downscaling, downzoning, so to speak. The R3 district that was around the downtown got reduced a couple years after we had broached and had some discussion about the, changing lot sizes and, reflecting what the neighborhoods actually have in the neighborhoods as opposed to superimposed zoning. Subsequent or shortly thereafter, there was an amendment that reduced the allowances in zoning in that denser area of the city. So at the time, to sort of contrast, there was a sensitivity to having greater density in units and build out and happening in the, historic areas of the city. Maybe the meter, there's some folks saying, well, maybe we're being too tight about regulations in one area or another. and it may be a different type of thinking now, but also potentially in a slightly different area. So it may not run into the same sort of conflict, depending on what pieces we're talking about.
So one thing to think about, I think, is how to market this, because I think what we're really talking about in these cases is trying to make the zoning match the historic character of the city. And so using, maybe right sizing isn't the right word, because people don't know. You could use other, a whole bunch of, but you could say traditional zoning, traditional districts.
It's a judgmental word.
Yeah, we just need to come up with something that kind of expresses what we're trying to do.
Agreed.
The other thing is on the Councilman Nicodemus amendment has not come to the council yet, correct?
No, it went into the council packet this week. Yeah, and so I did have a conversation about my suggestion at the time was perhaps because there was some interest in this overlapping area. I had actually seen it was the area that this amendment touches on, which is what it basically does is it says to the ZBA, for instance, if you're looking at an expansion of a house, consider as part of this, the desire to create, keep affordable housing and the impacts, that sort of thing. But I had actually suggested, could we wait a week or two to work with others to talk about how it kind of ties in, maybe have a package that deals with a couple of things together, and whatnot. There was desire to get that in the packet and get it going. So, from there it becomes, all right, let's try to work on it in committee.
Yeah, I think I've looked at it and I really have serious problems with it. And I know that Jared Eigenman wrote it and copied it from a court case, so that's where it came from. But it alludes to the city. The last version I saw alludes to the city's policy in support of starter homes, and nowhere else in the zoning ordinance does it say this. So this would be the only case where the city has a policy in favor of starter homes. It just seems.
Yeah, well, there's a relationship too to like expansion of homes. I mean, if you look at the historic areas of the city, this would be something saying, well, ZBA, should you allow expansions of structures generally? Because, it's got this constraint on trying to keep units smaller. What I said was that I appreciated the concept, and I think I agree with the concept of trying to, give greater consideration, however we do it, zoning or board decisions, to keeping smaller units, having smaller units, not just everything, that's changing become a giant unit. But I wouldn't necessarily have written it that way. I might have put it in a different place or,
Purpose section of the zoning.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. I said, to me, I would go right to the purpose section first.
See, we're in favor of smaller, more.
Yeah, to me, that I saw a relationship to Plum Island where you think about, you don't necessarily, the zoning already says essentially a purpose of the district is to reduce impacts and damage, right? So reducing growth is one of the intentions essentially of the district overall. That seems to be somewhat parallel to the, adding the purpose statement. So I was thinking something similar, but I was not able to sort of.
Yeah, we'll just have to.
We'll have to do it in committee. Yeah. And that's how it's.
I just wish it would come, I guess I wish we would have a bigger discussion about these things before it got memorialized in a zoning ordinance.
I'm 100% agreement. That's why, I was trying to pull this group together and I asked, could we work together to do this? There was desire, some folks, getting the docket, sponsoring, whatever, but my thinking was that doing it together in one organized fashion, that we talked about the policy and the tools and so forth that have one package makes more sense than just sort of rushing with one piece of it or showing,
I think we're in a position of pushing back against.
Well, we've had a track record of everything gets approved. At some point, something might not get approved, right? I mean, something might just not be popular.
In terms of zoning, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, something might get proposed, it's not popular enough to be approved.
Yeah, I mean, I could see this one being supported at the end of the day, but I definitely, I agree with Rick that I think in some way, shape or form, I would structure it, write it differently. I wouldn't have written it the way it was written in this example.
And think about the broader issue, because it's just, what this does, I think, is it only looks at starter homes, and uses the word so-called starter homes.
Yeah.
And it only looks at them in the case of an existing non-conforming structure that you want an extension.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the only case.
Yeah.
It seems very strict.
Yeah, well, again, if you think about some of those things are gonna apply, we're gonna see a lot of this, that's gonna affect a lot of the denser historic areas of the city where everything's not conforming.
Is this
right?
publicly online, by the way? Because you obviously know more than we know.
Yeah, no, sorry. Usually what I do when the council has, we try to coordinate in advance, but sometimes things are slow to make, so when they're coming in, I usually do is when they come on the council packet, I'm pushing out the planning board saying, all right, we're setting up, you want to talk to the chair, setting up a zoning hearing, here's the amendments, and so forth. I didn't have a chance to do that this week, but it was partly because I wasn't sure whether something else was going to be thrown on this next meeting. And we're having a discussion on Friday with some folks on this area, but it wasn't, normally I would have pushed up by now and said, like, this is the zoning amendment that was just pushed in, we're gonna have a discussion about it in a couple of weeks. But I'm sort of mentioning it briefly verbally here, but I'll push on tomorrow the text of it, but it's a very short text section, but I think it relates to a much larger issue. And probably it would have been nice if the whole thing was kind of brought together. My hope was that it was that. But again, I can't know, everybody has to kind of do it in their own capacity. In this case, councils are able to sponsor what they want. So, there may be a desire to merge together or incorporate other features or whatever. Maybe the new pieces that might be coming in, that can be advertised for the second hearing date on April 15th could be merged together somehow to work.
You'll be able to write the advertisement broadly so that if we decide we want to move it in the purpose section.
Well, and that was part of the concern I had here was like, I think this advertisement needs to be written a little bit more broadly than the non-conformance section, because the best way of getting to what's in this amendment may actually include other sections of the zoning ordinance. So I think that's what I was kind of thinking was,
Can you circulate this? Or I've just been looking online.
Yeah, it's essentially buried.
It sounds like this is a major policy.
Well, yeah, I mean, we should definitely, yeah, I think it's definitely worth, discussing. I'll push it out, but it's buried it's in a giant PDF that's the council packet for Monday's meeting. But it's buried in there as one of the things. I usually just extract it and send it to you and say, like, here it is. It's just 2 pages, basically.
So is that being brought by the planning and developing?
Several councilors have sponsored, I think there's 3 at least, about 4 of that amendment. And again, I think there's each council will have to speak for themselves as to what they think this, is doing and how it relates to their goals. But I think like Rick said, it relates to some other tools and techniques that people might have hoped to kind of work together on. But it's only 2 pages and I can push that extra down.
I was just thinking of mechanism wise, we want to get together and discuss it. We've done that for other things we do with ADU.
We can discuss it at the next meeting.
Oh, yeah.
The only thing we have at the next meeting right now is,
18. Yeah, so, and
It's
again,
pretty
city council,
Maybe I'm just, my imagination's going wild.
yeah, the city council does that as well. So for example, you could take advantage of your next meeting by prepping a little bit,
Meeting on that 18. Each of us.
And as soon as we get more
and you're saying,
information.
not gonna be till 2 weeks.
Because
Yeah, we touched base on like things to do it, when we advertise for, what can get a room and all, anyway. Long story short, we usually try to use planning board dates, and the one that worked for the councilors was the 15th of April. So, we're gonna go with that date, but then if it came up that there might be another zoning amendment, which we maybe just kind of, over the 3 days. Whether that rolls into the same night, possibly for efficiency, and it also might relate to the same subject.
So it's good to have an opportunity for us to discuss things
In advance,
in advance.
it'll make it more effective, I think, and it's in fairness for you, that the city council does that too in their own committee. They'll sometimes have, they're actually, I think, next Tuesday, meeting as well, I think it's Tuesday, meeting as well, a little bit in advance to prep a little bit their own discussion so that it's as efficient as possible as they need with you. So that makes perfect sense to me, I think, to take advantage of any needs you have in between, So, anyway.
My head's swimming. This is just kind of weird. This is a lot. Is this gonna be a pattern in this year with this new council? There's gonna be all kinds of ordinances and we're just playing catch up and.
Well, I'm trying to get a sense from each councilors what they're saying.
No, I get it. You're in a tough spot, but what's your best guess of?
There's definitely interested in affordable housing, right? And we can talk to that. What I wanted to talk about with them was sort of like which tools and techniques do we think we're using? Which ones are the best ones? How does it work in reality? Because some things it's on your regular books when you see how the permit works in zoning in Massachusetts with the loopholes and all, you gotta. So working through that stuff to get the best possible outcome, including, do we have to add a sentence over here? Do we need, or is that the right tool or technique? I mean, that's a discussion. I'm not sure,
Well, some of the intentions sound great. It's the execution that's gonna be really complicated.
I agree.
That's what I'm like trying to figure out.
I agree.
Even.
Yeah, I agree.
And I noticed the other day we were talking about just language, like common language at the request of the applicant. That's a standard language And then all of a sudden we were saying, don't use that, word, use another word. And you're like, well, what if that word means nothing?
Right.
It's bums me. But then all of a sudden someone will say, well, what does that mean? We'll say. I don't know.
Yeah, so I can only say from the conversations I've had this far, definitely there's interest in the affordable housing end. There's interest in looking at the superimposed lot requirements or setback requirements and lot, things, and saying, does this reflect the neighborhood? Perhaps when I say rights, whatever term we decide to use, I agree with Rick, let's come up with a better term, but whatever term we use, to make the zoning actually reflect, if you're going to redo something with a house, does it reflect allowing what's in that neighborhood already versus, something totally different. But the goals and objectives and whether or not these things sort of intersect with each other and overlap or are the right tool to use, I feel like that warrants a little bit more discussion. Because sometimes having only a superficial understanding of one area of zoning or the techniques and tools can result in something that's piecemeal or doesn't do as good of a job or
unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah.
So I was hoping that in one way, shape, or form, as we go forward, as we're getting ideas from them of what they want to do, we can intersect that with what we all think as planners make sense and come up with, at the end of the day, the best possible thing for the city with everybody's thoughts in mind.
There was a wave of these kinds of about 20 years ago when I heard some of them got executed well and some didn't. And what I'm hearing now is that like multiplied times 10 all of a sudden, which is great. The interest is fantastic. It's phenomenal. It's just a lot. It's just a lot.
It does fluctuate, and it's hard for me as a planner. I mean, this is you probably I know. Part of what we try to do comprehensive planning, right? We think long term, right? But a lot of sometimes what we have to deal with is just we try to make sure things aren't done, haphazardly or individually, right? Sort of comprehensive, but unfortunately, that's not how everything works. And, the waves of interest that I've seen in the west end of the city or even the city as a whole have fluctuated with the composition of the council, right? And which folks are, what timely issues are happening, and sometimes that drives things in ways that aren't comprehensive per se, but they're sort of like that becomes the thing of it. And
so my question is, I'm just one person, so but I'm very excited about some of these things. So I want to make sure that I'm prepared to help.
Yeah.
When there's a way to help.
Yeah.
And so, like for this courts and lanes thing to happen, I've never seen ordinance go that fast. It's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
And actually, I'd like to see.
It doesn't always go that fast.
No. But if it could be done well and that fast, that would be great. But we would for us to participate and be helpful, we just need to kind of see we need a little visibility to what's coming.
Yeah.
And we're not just being reactionary. I mean, maybe I'm just going to listen and it's just going to happen, but I would love to participate. And so if I can be a little proactive, that would be awesome.
One thing that we could perhaps ask, and we have to talk about like how do we do it mechanically, is it the entire council we're discussing with versus the planning development committee, because those are the folks that usually meet with us.
Can they just copy us on more things for a while? Since if they're going to be cranking out a lot of ideas, could they just copy us more frequently?
Yeah, and I'll communicate that. I'll certainly ask it again or repeat that sort of requested theme and for everybody here. But I also think like perhaps one of the things that we could do, whether it's the chairs or members or the councilors who are coming here and doing a joint public hearing, but we could say whether they coming and meet with us or one of us with me going to the planning development committee meeting that they have when they meet and say can we talk about what the zoning and sort of make sure the dialogue is happening together in some way, even if because it's hard to get sometimes them to your meetings or you to their meetings, but if we could try to merge those or overlap those discussions a bit where if I'm going to their meetings and I'm seeing that they're talking about something, of course, I'm going to be coming back and saying, all right, planning board, we get to stress, this, if that dialogue isn't happening, we should try to, maybe if we want to come up with some situation where if it isn't just a bird the chair, one or more members could come to a planning development meeting with me as they're meeting, and we could talk about this stuff, try to get more insight, try to talk more in advance, and not have it be just, whatever things come up.
That's sweet. It was great.
That was that was a very productive meeting.
I wish I could do that.
15 is a tough time. I did have to work a little early, but it was great. Yeah.
So you're going to
I went to the last one. Yeah, just the.
When do they meet?
Generally, it's they have a very strange schedule right now. They're using it every 3-week thing, so it's confusing, but it's lovely every 3 weeks. They're having a meeting for this, committee.
So it's public, it's noticed, it's where.
Public
council
notice,
chambers.
council chambers, they post their agendas aren't posted quite as clearly or coherently as ours, I think, but you can see, if you look on their pages, eventually look at the tabs of the number, you can see sort of what's on their agendas. They'll be discussed, I think, because, like you said, there'll be discussion of more zoning things in the council and this committee now. I think the planning development committee, regulatory changes, zoning changes, the demolition delay, actually, sorry, I should have mentioned that as well. This is non-zoning, but the demolition delay ordinance has also been proposed for a change. And this goes,
I want to ask you about that.
so, yeah, so.
See, there's just so much stuff. There's a lot. There's a lot of stuff.
18 Highland Ave.
Yeah,
Because they're reducing the length of time from 75 years to 50 years.
that's the proposal, yeah.
So then 18 Highland Avenue would be historic.
Correct.
So they could say we could have a 2-year delay, and they're increasing the time of the delay to 2 years.
The proposal is 3.
Yeah, no, but they're gonna aim for 2.
I don't think 3 is realistic, maybe, but yeah.
And that would be, and there's no grandfather, because it's not a zoning.
See, this,
Correct. However, it's also, the downside of a tool like that.
No, I'm not saying it's a good, I'm saying it's a bad.
Oh, yeah.
see, this is where, I mean, this is where a lot of people too can get really muddled between their goal, which is affordable housing and things that sound
Yeah.
good, and things that they try to implement, which actually do the exact opposite.
And that was probably my concern, saying like, before everybody rushes in and sponsors something, out of the gates thinking like, could we at least meet to try to coordinate together, and walk through, one, try to coordinate it. And 2, try to walk through whether we're using the right tools, whether we're using the best
How do
way,
you accomplish
how to detect the consequences,
Or frankly, Andy, and this is gonna be uncomfortable for you, but when it's this intense, there's gonna be more disagreement. And that's healthy. It's healthy. It's gonna be healthy to have more disagreement.
Yeah.
Because if people just think they can, like, we're just a rubber stamp for what the council comes up with, that's not helpful
Yeah.
to the city.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer things, the policy, I've talked about it with recent councils who've come on, because I try to frame as best I can as a planner, but my preference and my best practice is, let's talk about the overall land use policy you want first, before we go into the weeds of the language, right? And that's why it's sometimes difficult when there's an insistence upon giving, the specific language is put on the floor, and we're already running with that, trying to work with it and, change or modify with that. Versus saying, for instance, short-term rental units, I keep citing this one, but it took 3 years to work out for the council or what worked there for the council. 3 years, and I'm talking hundreds of iterations of different verbiage.
We were all there with you.
Yeah, so, and my preference with that one is perfectly illustrated, is that it would have been a lot better for the council to say, let's talk about the basic parameters first, because what we found was there just wasn't support for the overall framework that had been worked on for like a 2.5 year framework. Period. And it would have been better for them to step back and say, what are the basic parameters we do agree on and we feel like are essential, and then to work on the language and the, formalities. But there isn't always agreement. Some folks want to move ahead in a different way. And so we try to keep it in sync,
It's gonna get spicy.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good thing, actually.
I love these good discussions about zoning.
Figures to big, stand up and then I agree with Ricky, it's like, if it's already wet cement that you can really put your hand in, and at the time say, what are you gonna do? You're gonna play word games, but you can't step back and say, wait a minute, step back. It shouldn't go there, it should go there, and I know it's hard, I mean, believe me.
Yeah, well, and that's why, Jennifer and I were talking earlier today. Jennifer's our zoning administrator. But we were talking today. She's busy. We're having discussions. She's pulling out all these examples as we're talking to her, saying like, well, if the idea is to do this thing, we'll get us talk through the examples, then what they want to do. But like, let's pull out examples of how that how that's worked before, how it works in a given situation recently. What we saw before the board. The ZBA a lot. These residential ones, single residential lots. And so walking through some of those examples and seeing how things work, we thought that'd be helpful, because having a disconnect between all the idiosyncrasies and, exemptions and streamlined processes of, single and two-family homes and whatnot, non-conformances, variances, it just seemed better for us to discuss the overall framework, the tools.
Right.
So it should be good, no matter what, but hopefully it'll be as organized and efficient as possible, and not using the wrong tools and not having unintended consequences, or, thrusting something forward before there's political support, or community support for it, and then finding out that we're having a, intense debate, that it's sort of like, well, is there really support for whatever the provisions are, irrespective of what those particulars are. I think it's good to me that there's interest from the council in some of these things, frankly. But I'm also hesitant to arrest it, because I want to make sure that they're the right tools, and we're, not spinning our wheels on something that isn't effective or is only piecemeal. I'd rather work comprehensively if we can, but we have to adapt to, a variety of different, inputs. So anyway, that'll be coming along the 15th, and we'll get you more information as soon as we can. I'll report to you the 2-page and then the text, but you can only glean a little bit in this piece. There'll be a case attached to it. It was in the council packet, the York case that was cited as sort of, example of, what this is sort of, around. So, don't, you want to read those, that case too, and see, what it talks about. And then we can talk about the policy, larger policy stuff will probably be a good point of discussion.
Are P and D on YouTube? Or no? They don't report it? Do they not report it?
The council records their meetings and the planning development committee.
They do.
records theirs,
That's on YouTube?
yeah.
Or me?
The council meetings,
No, the planning development.
planning development, they record theirs, they should be doing them as Zoom as well. So,
Oh, they are?
yeah, and so, I can't get, their audio sometimes that's actually being better than ours in the
Right,
council
because it's
chamber.
better rooms.
Because their room is better for it and they don't move their mics around.
So the schedule's every 3 weeks, you're saying?
Yeah, I look at the calendar, normally I'd say, we do ours like regularly every first and every week. They don't do it that way, they decided this council session to have like a 3-week offset thing. So it made it really hard for them to figure out what their committee dates were. So I can only tell by looking at the calendar, like when they're having committee meeting, they might want to do that, if you're looking for that.
He's on two of us recorded.
3 really quick questions.
Private?
Is anything happening with Haley?
Yeah, great question. I haven't spoken to Lou in a couple of weeks on that. When I last left off, I had had a conversation where I was actually, and I'll have to circle back with Greg, our building commissioner, or Dennis, the assistant inspector, but they were picking up with him the building permit, and whether or not he was going to start going this season, essentially, and get going. And I never got completely the answer. My understanding was it was going to be fall of this year is what Lou was thinking, that he was going to be starting the actual sort of substantial construction over there. But I do now, to your point, I want to circle back on that because it's been a couple of weeks and I haven't gotten anything definitive, beyond that sort of mention there. So I do want to circle back with Lou and the
I think they fired up the backhoe and rotated it around, sold it around.
The second question, have you had any bites for MBTA zoning?
It's funny you say that. I'm actually surprised a little bit. Well, in some way, I should say 2 things in that. One is I'm surprised that no, we haven't, seen.
People all around us are getting developments.
There's a report out.
Well, the other thing too, this is interesting to me, but the whole thing, Rob Chipetti, the ZBA, Rob he was with me today. You were there. We had a discussion about the Kmart Plaza Landing with some of the folks in the business community, and I had to comment on the fact that I think it's interesting. In our situation, we hit on the 40R district before the state came out with MBTA communities. It's like the predecessor, that basically kind of lining up, for that. And we did it voluntarily, but we decided consciously to make that 25% of the units affordable, not 20, which is what the baseline. Because one, you get more units that are affordable, right? 5% more. But also all of the units, if it's rental, all the units have there's housing inventory, right? Help with this.
And that was the 40R was already written that way too, right?
40R, we chose, yeah, and in our situation, we were very lucky because we were essentially a grandfathered 40R district where the state said, you can continue to use that requirement for 25%. But I personally didn't agree with the Commonwealth basically saying to communities and MBTA communities, if you don't already have one of these grandfathered situations, you now have to start with like a 10% and you have to do a whole analysis and report to justify how the developer can afford to do the affordable units. I think that was a huge mistake, the way that it was done that way. I can't, I don't control that, but I think it's a missed opportunity. And I think it in some ways harms us or communities that have like higher percentage because developers going to go where they have a lower percentage of the obligation. And I think the Commonwealth harmed the region in some ways by just saying, we're just going to assume that by mass producing units, but lowering the threshold significantly. So, Luke's not surprisingly comes in and says, well, if other people can do like lower percentages, like, and I'm like, I don't think we're going to reduce your percentage in your project by modifying, the permit, but I can see how that could, create some focus elsewhere rather than in our district.
There's 2 projects going on in Raleigh and one in Newbury, Amesbury.
Yeah, again, I think that's a mistake for the Commonwealth, and I don't know what that will do for us, unfortunately, but it is what I think it's a mistake.
My third question, and we'll be very quick about this. What's happening in Portland?
I haven't heard anything new on that. The last conversation I had, it was a couple weeks back at mayor's office. We've been busy with a lot of things, but we were going to circle back and pick up with, again, the new composition of the council, where councilors fall on some of the basic parameters. Again, we have to go back to sort of what are the basic things that folks know are important, what's going to work, from a sort of a term sheet kind of perspective, what are the basic things that people thought are important? And I think frankly, you really can't bring forward any sort of, specific zoning amendment and, until you have something there. So I'm not seeing anything new from NED just at the moment. There's not any meetings sort of set up for, at this specific time. I've been trying to, as I talk with counselors, get an idea of, what are their thoughts or concerns? Do they understand the whole context of what's been discussed previously? Do they need more background, that sort of thing. But I'm not seeing anything actively moving forward right now. But I will, if I do, well, certainly let you know. I will, again, ask the question as I periodically do anyway, if you don't ask, is, anything to discuss there? Should we, pick up a discussion? Do we work together with the same board? I'll.
Because we had a draft ordinance outline, and then we gave it to Emily, and she did
Yeah.
it's like 2 years.
Yeah.
Right,
I'm out.
motion to adjourn.
Stay longer. Make up for your last night.
Close the meeting
Adjourn?
except for Joe.
Motion to adjourn. Second, all those in favor?
I'm out. I like that.